Wildlife and Parks and the chair of the Northern Continental Divide Ecosystem Subcommittee of the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee. And welcome to our meeting. We're hosting virtually, obviously, and I know as we were preparing for this meeting, there was some thought that we would all like to still meet in person, but really hard to manage right now. So not to put any pressure on the next NCDE chair, but I hope the next time we meet, we're able to meet in person. I know we missed the opportunity to visit behind the scenes and after meetings and the rest, and those are really rich conversations. But nonetheless, I think we've put together a really heavy agenda. Received a lot of input before we set this meeting on how best to manage this. The virtual meetings are hard to sit through all day, and they do drain you a fair bit. So the request was, can we try to move this to 2 days? And so hopefully we're successful in keeping 2 shorter virtual meetings and accomplish all that we hope to. I want to just, before we do introductions, I want to talk a little bit about a subtle shift in the agenda. I sent it out fairly late this morning. So if you're paying close attention, you'll see that the overall structure is the same. We'll be meeting both days, starting at about this same time at 9 and trying to adjourn earlier in the day. But we did make an adjustment, and working with Hillary Cooley and Lori Roberts and Dylan Tabish as they were preparing to work through the NCDE work plan review and talk a little bit about our work plan priorities and how those align with the IGBC. The thought was, there are so many updates that are coming at folks over these 2 days on work that's directly tied to those priorities, that it really made a lot more sense to host that portion of this meeting towards the end. And in that way, kind of capture what we knew and what we received for updates and how those align with the priorities, and then allow us to have a conversation towards what we want to take on next as a subcommittee. So you see that adjustment is to move that NCDE work plan to day 2 in the morning. And we've replaced it or swapped it with the agency or tribal roundtable updates, which we'll do after lunch today. So apologies if you were unprepared for providing your update today. Hopefully you'll have a little time through the meeting and at lunch to adjust to that. And I also know that there's folks who are sitting in for subcommittee members that may suddenly be surprised that they have a responsibility to present an update today. So recognize that as well. We'll get through it together, and feel free to let me know if that's going to upset things too much. So with that, I thought, Dylan, do you want to take a second and walk through any overview or concern or IT technical things that you need to address? And if not, I'll move on to introductions.
Yeah, I guess I would just ask if there's anybody who's in the panelist or attendees. Oh, looks like Carrie, for example. I'll bring her in as a panelist. If you are in the attendees and need to be a presenter, please raise your hand and I'll admit you into the meeting. And everybody, please update your names so that way I know who you are and then the viewers know who you are. We will have a public comment portion at the end of each of these meetings, and we'll do it for folks who've been in these meetings before. We'll just do it like we have before, where folks will raise their hand virtually by either scrolling over their name and clicking raise hand, or if you're on a phone, you press *9 and that will allow you to raise your hand. And yeah, then I think that's all the technical stuff. Gosh, we've been doing this for a year, Randy, and I feel like I'm getting rustier somehow. So, because all these Zoom things, but yeah, we'll get through it together, and thanks for everybody's help. And without that, I will kick it off back to you, Randy.
All right, I had Ben, did you have a question? Your hand was up for just a second.
No, I thought he was going to queue up any presenters right now.
All right, thanks. With that, you've met me and Dylan. Ben, you're next if you want to introduce yourself.
You bet. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ben Connard. I'm with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I serve as the Deputy Office Supervisor here in Montana. And I'll update on the BNSF Railway Grizzly Bear HCP. As many of you know, this has been long in the planning. In January, we published the draft HCP in the Federal Register, along with some of our draft decision documents. Went through a 30-day public comment. So now we're in the process of sifting through comments and making adjustments. Some of those responsibilities fall on BNSF Railway. For example, there are comments about are there more things you can do, like fence the corridor or put some kind of string of warning devices in the track. BNSF will need to address those comments, decide whether or not they can accommodate those types of changes. If the changes to the HCP are significant enough, then the HCP will have to go out for another round of public comment. If they are not, then they will submit a final and will proceed with the decision process. Meanwhile, the Fish and Wildlife Service needs to determine if issuing incidental take for railway strikes would jeopardize the grizzly bear. And so we're going through some of the biological scientific comments we received, as well as incorporating all the updated information that we can find. As many know, the grizzly bear SSA came out this year. So that's where we are in the process. We would expect best case scenario to be late spring, early summer if an HCP is to be issued. It depends on the length of review, the amount of revisions, and the determinations of all the documents. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to entertain them.
Yeah, Ben. Well, we're off to a really quick start. And I wasn't very clear when I said you were next. I should have been a little more clear. So I thought what we would do is work through our introductions of all the folks who have joined us today on the subcommittee. You do have a short agenda period slated for later. So I think what we'll do is maybe have you walk through that review briefly again and maybe take questions then. Does that work for you?
Yeah, I'm sorry for the mix up there. I thought with the change of an agenda, that was the update. So if you want, I'm happy to repeat. Sorry for the mix up. I thought you were prompting me for the update.
Yep. As soon as you started, I thought, yep, I just prompted Ben to go next. So, well, thanks, Ben. I think we'll just assign a little time for you to receive questions later in the agenda, and we'll just keep rolling through introductions.
You bet. Sorry for snafu.
Yeah, no worries. Let's see. Next on my list, I have for Dale Becker.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dale Becker. I'm currently the Wildlife Program Manager for the Confederated Salish Kootenai Tribes for one more day. Today, I'm retiring. I first wanted to mention just briefly that, as you're all aware, Stacy Corville, who has worked with all of you in the past for a number of years, passed away a couple months back. And we wanted to thank him on behalf of our program and also on behalf of his family for all the kind words and messages that we received on his passing. He'll be missed certainly here at our office and in our organization, but I'm sure in NCDE group also. I also wanted to mention, as I mentioned, I'll be retiring today. Whisper Camel Means will be my replacement starting first of the week, and very outstanding replacement, and I know she'll work well with your group. She'll introduce herself in a bit. She'll be the representative for the tribes on the NCDE subcommittee. And then Carrie Anies, who many of you know, worked with Stacy, will be working on the science team and the on the ground staff here. So you'll be meeting them shortly. So that's all I have, Randy. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Dale. And thanks for mentioning Stacy. It's a real loss for everybody, I'm sure. And thanks for addressing that. Great. Frank Van Manen.
Good morning. Frank Van Manen, team leader of the Interagency Grizzly Bear Study Team. And I'm not sure I actually officially serve on this committee, so I was mostly listening in today.
Well, thanks, Frank. Saw your name and I thought, well, I don't want to skip you.
Appreciate it.
And let's go to George Edwards.
Hey, everybody, George Edwards, Executive Director of the Livestock Loss Board. And I'll talk to everybody later during my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Jamie, are you able to introduce yourself quickly? Jamie Junkel?
Yeah, Jamie Jonkel, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, Region 2, Bear Management.
I've been on calls with Jamie lately. Sometimes he's in the field on his phone and can or can't connect. So glad to have you, Jamie. Thanks. And next, I have Hillary Cooley.
Thanks, Randy. Hi, everyone. I'm Hillary Cooley. I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm the Grizzly Bear Recovery Coordinator, and I'm an advisor on this subcommittee.
Thanks, Hillary. Jennifer Fortin Norris. We'll give Jennifer maybe a second to check in with us here in a second if she pops back up. Let's go to Jeremy Anderson.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Jeremy Anderson. I'm the forest wildlife biologist on the Kootenai National Forest in Libby, Montana. And I'm filling in for Brian Donner. He's our district ranger up in Eureka, and he's retiring tomorrow. So thank you.
Well, congratulations to Brian. And thanks for joining us, Jeremy. Jody Bush.
Good morning. Sorry, trying to do the mute shuffle here. My name is Jody Bush. I'm the Fish and Wildlife Service representative on this committee. I'm the supervisor for ES in Montana.
Great, thanks, Jody. And I see a Carrie, I think is how that's pronounced. Carrie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Randy. My name is Carrie Enius. I'm with the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes Wildlife Management Program as a wildlife biologist.
Great, thanks, Carrie. And I wasn't able to hear you very well. Did you want to take a second now to see if your mic will pick you up a little better?
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
I can, thanks.
Yes, my name is Carrie Enius. I'm with the CSKT Wildlife Management Program, working as a biologist.
Very good, thanks a lot. Let's see, Katie Stevens.
Morning, everyone. I'm Katie Stevens. I'm the Western Montana District Manager for the Bureau of Land Management. Good to see everybody this morning.
Thanks, Katie. Ken McDonald.
Good morning. I'm Ken McDonald. I'm the Chief of the Wildlife Division with Fish, Wildlife and Parks in Helena, Montana.
Thanks, Ken. Lori Roberts.
I'm Lori Roberts. I work for the Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks on the Grizzly Bear Trend Monitoring Team.
Thanks, Lori. Mark Haroldson.
Hi, Mark Haroldson. I'm with the Interagency Grizzly Bear Study Team in Bozeman. I'm just listening in today.
Great, thanks for joining us, Mark. Mike Munoz.
Hello, Mike Munoz. A little slow there. District Ranger with the Rocky Mountain District. I'm just listening in. I'm Sarah's representing Bill today. Okay.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. Let's see. Paul Frame.
Hi, everybody. I'm Paul Frame. I'm the Provincial Carnivore Specialist with Alberta Environment and Parks up in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And glad to be here. Thanks.
It's great to have you, Paul. Thanks for joining us. Rich Harris.
Hi, Rich Harris, Fish, Wildlife and Parks, work for Ken McDonald, coordinating the statewide grizzly bear plan for Fish, Wildlife and Parks.
Thanks, Rich. Ross Beatty.
Ross Beatty with Montana DNRC, wildlife biologist here in Missoula.
Thanks, Ross. Sarah Mabin.
Morning, everybody. I'm Sarah Mabin. I'm the Deputy Forest Supervisor on the Helena Lewis and Clark, sitting in for Bill, who is sitting on a regional leadership team meeting. He'll be joining you all tomorrow.
Thanks, Sarah. Scott Jackson.
Morning. I'm Scott Jackson with the Forest Service, based in Missoula. I'm the National Carnivore Program Lead. Good to see you folks. Thanks, Randy.
Yeah, you bet, Scott. Good morning. Tabitha Graves.
Good morning. I'm Tabitha Graves. I'm with USGS, and I'm sitting in for Claudia Reagan today, and USGS serves an advisory role on this committee.
Thanks, Tabitha. Let's see. Joe Wiegand.
Good morning. Joe Wiegand, Montana Department of Transportation. I'm the Missoula District Biologist. The Missoula District for MDT covers most of FWP regions 1 and 2. Paul Sturm is my counterpart on the East Front, and he covers all of that area plus a little bit of FWP region 3.
Thanks, Joe. Wesley Sarmento.
Hello, everyone. I'm Wesley Sarmento, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks Region 4 out of Conrad. I do bear management, and I'm just listening in this morning. Thanks.
And Whisper Camel Means.
Good morning. Whisper Camel Means Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes.
Morning, Whisper. Will Young.
Good morning, everyone. Will Young. I'm the Resource and Planning Staff Officer on the Flathead National Forest, and I'll be filling in for Kurt Steele today.
Great, thanks, Will. Let's see, John Waller.
Morning, everybody. I'm John Waller, Carnivore Program Manager at Glacier National Park. Our Superintendent, Jeff Mao, has taken a detail as the Alaska Regional Director, and so Pete Webster will be acting as the superintendent for the next 4 months about, and I guess I'm sitting in for Pete Webster today. So good to see everybody.
Oh, they're in good hands, John. Kathy Ake.
Good morning, this is Kathy Ake. I'm the GIS specialist for the NCDE, and sitting in and listening today, and we'll be presenting tomorrow.
Great. Let's see, Kim Annis.
Hi, Kim Annis, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks out of Libby, and just sitting and listening today.
Thanks, Kim. Craig Glazier.
Craig Glazier with USDA's Wildlife Services here in Helena. I'm the district supervisor.
Thanks, Craig. So I've reached the bottom of my list of attendees here, but I do think we jump past Jennifer Fortin Norris.
And I also added Chad White too. Sorry, Randy, I'm doing some musical chairs on you.
Great. Chad, do you want to go next?
Hello, I'm Chad White. I'm the new grizzly bear management specialist in Shodo for Fish, Wildlife and Parks.
Great. Nice to see you, Chad. Thanks for joining us. And I'll try a second to see if Jennifer wants to introduce herself.
Thanks, Randy. I'm Jennifer Fortin Norris. I'm with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Grizzly Bear Recovery Program here in Missoula. Mostly listening in, but I'll give a brief presentation this morning.
Thanks, Jennifer. So this will be a little difficult to manage if I missed a bunch of people, but anybody else who I've missed, here's a chance to introduce yourself. I see Cecily's hand's raised.
Hi, I'm Cecily Costello with Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, and I oversee the trend monitoring program in the NCDE and act as an advisor to the subcommittee.
Thanks, Cecily. On my list, you were one of the first at the very top, and then you got juggled right off the bat. So sorry I missed you. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you very much for all the introductions.
Oop, you got muted, Randy.
Sorry about that. So thanks, everybody. I think we'll turn now to Cecily Costello. Cecily, if you'd like to share your screen, and we'll move to your portion on the agenda. Thank you.
Are we looking at the right slide there?
I don't see a shared screen yet, Cecily, so I don't know if
All
you
right.
need to click that green button again.
There we go. Is that working?
Bingo.
Okay. Let me get up my notes. Oh. Okay, so I want to just give an update on the 2020 field season and the annual results related to the demographic monitoring in the NCDE. And I would like to acknowledge my co-authors. These are the members of our monitoring team that works to capture and monitor radio collared bears and monitor the population. And I especially want to acknowledge Stacy Corville, who was a very treasured member of our team and who we will miss very much. So the topics that we're going to cover are the demographic objectives as they're outlined in the conservation strategy. And we use those demographic objectives because they're kind of the latest and greatest, even though the conservation strategy is not specifically in place right now, but those are the thresholds that we look at. We have an occupancy threshold, an independent female survival threshold, and then mortality thresholds for females and males, independent. And then we also monitor demographic and genetic connectivity. So I'll go through each of those things. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the opportunistic DNA sampling that we do. We haven't ever really reported on it before, but we thought we might mention some of that work that we also do. And then I'll finish up just touching on some of the other research projects that we're working on at this time. So for the occupancy threshold.
Cecily, your slides aren't advancing.
Oh.
We're still on the title slide.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
I don't know how to make them go. I may have to start again.
Yeah.
Shoot. I apologize. We did a test run. They never work.
They never work, yeah.
Does it work to use the keyboard to advance?
Is that working?
No.
No. Okay, stop share. All right. Oops.
There we go. Now we can see your PowerPoint. You just need to, yep, slideshow.
So, is it showing the right one?
It's
Or do
showing
I
the
need-
first, it's showing the first one again,
Okay,
your title slide.
is it moving now?
It isn't moving. Yep, we can see topics.
Perfect, okay. Sorry
Good
about
job.
that. It's so hard when you have two screens. Okay, so anyway, these are the topics which I mentioned that we're going to go through. So I'm going to get to the conservation strategy thresholds. The first is the occupancy threshold, where we are attempting to maintain documented presence of females with dependent offspring. Those are either cubs, yearlings, or 2-year-olds. We look at this over a period of at least every 6 years, and we look at having at least 21 out of 23 bear management units occupied, and 6 out of 7 occupancy units, which we look at in zone 1. This is a map of those units. You can see the bluer area is the recovery zone, or the primary conservation area is another name for it. Zone 1 is the other section of the demographic monitoring area. And in that we have occupancy zones that we also look at for occupancy. If you look at these crosshatched areas, these are the zones that we did have occupancy of females with offspring during the year of 2020. So there were only 3 that we did not see occupied during 2020: the Rattlesnake, the upper South Fork of the Flathead, and the upper Middle Fork of the Flathead units. If you look at this table over the last 6 years, you can see that in 2020 we had 19, and over the entire 6 years, all 23 of the units have been occupied at least once, and most of them during multiple years. If we look at the occupancy units in zone 1, all of them were occupied in 2020, and of course, all were occupied during the last 6 years, and most of them being occupied during many of the last 6 years. For our independent female survival threshold, we use a 6-year running average to estimate the survival rate from our sample of radio monitored bears. And our objective is maintaining, for the 2020 threshold is 93% survival, which is consistent with a projected 90% probability that the population within the DMA will remain above 800 bears. And this is where we look during the last 6 years. We have maintained the survival rate at or above this 93% survival rate. So we're hitting that threshold as well. For the independent mortality thresholds, we also use a 6-year running average, and we look to limit the annual number of total reported and unreported mortalities to less than or equal 24 is the 2020 threshold for females, and less than or equal 29, that's the 2020 threshold for males. And of course, both of those are consistent with a projected 90% probability that the population will remain above 800 bears in the DMA. So I'm going to go through the process by which we estimated that reported and unreported mortality, because it does take into account bears that we do not document dying. And so this is a table that shows all of the documented mortalities that we monitored during 2020. Overall, we had 37 total mortalities. 35 of those occurred within the demographic monitoring area and 2 were outside. Altogether, we had 24 independent aged bears. Those are bears that are 2 years old or older. And then we also had 13 dependent young, which would be cubs or yearlings. And then note that that line of independent bears inside the DMA is what we're going to use to estimate the total reported and unreported mortality. So you'll see that line again. This is a map of where the mortalities occurred during 2020, with the pink symbols being females, the blue squares being males, and the triangles being unknown sex animals. You can see that they were mostly on the periphery of the ecosystem and some were outside of the DMA. If we look at this graphically, this is a depiction of the documented independent bear mortalities by zone since 2004. You can see that the numbers within the primary conservation area or the recovery zone have remained relatively steady over that time frame, even though the population is continuing to increase. But we are seeing increasing numbers in zone 1 and outside of the recovery zone as the population increases and expands. These are the causes of death for independent bears. The blue lines represent a total of the bears between 2004 and 2019, and then the orange depicts just what happened in 2020. In 2020, we had 11 management removals. 6 of those were site conflicts where there was food that attracted bears in, or property damage, or bears that were habituated. We had 5 that were removed because of livestock depredation. We've had, during 2020, we had 3 bears that were killed by automobiles. We had 6 that were killed in defense of life, 1 in defense of property, and 3 were killed in poaching or are currently under investigation. So again, taking the documented mortalities and trying to estimate the total number of reported and unreported mortalities, we take that line from the table of bears, female and male bears that are independent age inside the DMA, and we had 11 females and 12 males. Those 11 females, 5 of them were agency removals, 3 were documented through telemetry, and then another 3 of those were reported mortalities. So we take those 3 reported mortalities and we bump it up a little bit to account for bears that were probably unreported. And that gives us a total of 12 females that were estimated as independent mortalities inside the DMA. We do the same with males. There were 12 documented, 5 of those being reported, and that gets bumps up. The 5 gets bumped up to 7, giving us a total of 14. So our total estimated mortality, including males and females, is 26 independent bears inside the DMA. So we take that number and we look at it over a 6-year time frame, averaging it over the 6 years. And for females, the 6-year threshold for 2020 was 24, which you see as the dotted orange line. And our 6-year estimate of total reported and unreported mortalities was only 13. So it was well below the threshold. And for males, the 6-year threshold in 2020 was 29 bears. And our 6-year running estimate was only 21. So again, well below the threshold. So the other thing that we want to do is continue to monitor genetic and demographic connectivity. And so we estimate the spatial distribution of the population biennially. The last time we did that was in 2018. So we just did it for 2020. And then we want to identify the population of origin for individuals sampled inside and outside of the DMA. To see whether or not we can detect bears that have moved into the NCDE from other ecosystems. So this was the estimated distribution that accounts for the years 2009 to 2018. So it's a 10-year period. That last distribution covered about 64,000 square kilometers. And then I'll overlay our most recent 2020 estimate that looks at the years 2011 to 2020. You can see that it hasn't really changed too dramatically. We continued to maintain distribution in essentially the same area, but we're squeaking a little bit further south. And then on the east front, it's remained about the same, although there are a few more outlier observations that don't really account for the distribution estimate. I just wanted to point out, and Jennifer might talk about this a little bit more, but we have been working with the Fish and Wildlife Service to maintain a database of outlier locations so that we can map areas where bears may be present. And so this is probably how we're going to kind of describe outliers in the future. So I wanted to present this map. And this map is available on the internet. But you can see that we have detected bears well outside of the NCDE and in between areas between the Northern Continental Divide and the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And I wanted to talk about some of those verified observations that were collected in 2020. And I described them by their watershed. So in 2020, we had, besides the area where the estimated distribution occurs, we also had 3 verified observations in the Bitterroot watershed, well outside of that area. We had 5 observations in the Big Hole watershed. We had 2 in the Gallatin watershed and 1 in the Red Rock watershed. So those were areas where we saw bears between the 2 ecosystems of Yellowstone and the NCDE. When we have all our genetic information from the 2 populations, we the lab up in Canada where we send them do this genetic clustering analysis, which allows us to identify the population of origin for individuals. This graph shows that the symbols on the left side in the yellow pertain to the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and the symbols in gray on the right pertain to the NCDE population. Right now, we have been able to compare 1,528 NCDE genotypes to 1,242 Yellowstone genotypes. These are genotypes that have only been done up to 2019 because it takes about a year to get our samples back. So we don't have our 2020 genotypes back yet. But the pink symbols there indicate the ones that were collected in 2019, and you can see that they continue. Those are bears that were captured in the NCDE, and they continue to be clustered with the NCDE bears. So using this, we have not detected a bear from the Yellowstone ecosystem in the NCDE as of yet. So I also wanted to talk about our opportunistic DNA sampling that we do. We do not do any kind of systematic sampling of DNA across the ecosystem, but when we find opportunistic samples, sometimes we'll see hairs on rub trees or on fence posts or on bridges when we're out in the field doing research, and we will collect those. In addition to that, our bear managers will collect them where they find them, and they will often collect DNA samples at sites of conflict. Sometimes that occurs when they've had a conflict and perhaps they've tried to catch a bear, but they were not able to catch a bear, but they were able to get a sample from those. So we thought we would just describe some of what we have pertaining to those sorts of samples, because we haven't ever really reported on this before. But we really started getting good data from this in 2009. And since 2009 and between 2009 and 2019, we collected 804 different samples. On average, about 46% of those were successfully genotyped as grizzly bears. The other ones had inadequate numbers of hairs, and so they weren't actually sampled or for DNA. Some of them failed to have adequate amount of DNA, and then some of them turned out to be black bears. After about 2014, you can see that those red bars got a little smaller, and that's because we got a little better at differentiating those black bear hairs before we sent them into the lab. And so we're getting a little more success rate over the last few years. But when you look at this, this is, it shows how many of the bears that the grizzly bears that we did genotype from these opportunistic samples. It shows you how many of them were new individuals and how many were bears that had been previously detected or captured. And you can see that a pretty significant number of them are new individuals. We have detected 120 different new individuals since 2009. And then we also detected 142 previously captured bears. This gives you an idea of where those samples have been collected. They kind of, a lot of them are on the periphery, which again gives us some information about bears that are living in the outskirts. We can use some information from them to estimate their paternity, and potentially in the future, we'd like to look at their dispersal and where they might have originated from, where their parents might have been and where they grew up. And then it also gives us information related to management history. So sometimes when the managers get these samples from a capture site, or a conflict site, it may provide us with information about bears that have a management history, but maybe were not captured each time that they were in conflict. So it does help with conflict and making decisions about when it's time to remove a bear. And then finally, I just want to talk about some of the research projects that we're working on. During 2020 2021 and 22, we're going to be looking specifically at grizzly bear use of grain bins out on the East Front. We're going to put out collars on a few research bears so that we can look at how they're using that resource and what their movements are like in that environment. So we're kind of excited to be able to do that. Our postdoctorate, Sarah Sells, has begun work on the phase 2 of our population expansion and connectivity analysis. You may recall we did a previous study in 2016 where we looked at male movement, or we tried to model male movement between the NCDE and the Yellowstone ecosystem. We're going to do something similar with that, but we're going to try to look at, besides just movement, we're going to look at how bears might settle and expand and include females in that. So that's something we're going to try to finish in the next 2 years. And I think it would be really helpful for understanding how these bear populations are expanding. We are about finished with the analysis, and we've begun writing up a manuscript about estimating the timing of parturition and whether or not individuals have had a litter of cubs in the den based on the activity data that we obtained from their radio collars. So that's kind of an interesting twist on some of the monitoring that we do. It might give us an opportunity to better estimate the proportion of females that have cubs of the year. And then we're also using activity to look at denning chronology. So it gives us an opportunity to determine the exact timing when bears are going in and out of the dormancy period. It may not line up specifically with when they come in and out of the den, but it should be relatively close. So that will give us a lot of good information about denning chronology. We're continuing to work with folks from the University of Montana and the study team in Yellowstone on our integrated population model. We do have a working model. It's mostly the Yellowstone model that's up and running. The NCDE part of it still needs some work, but we're still hopeful that we will have something that can help us with our monitoring in the NCDE. We've recently been completing some home range analysis using the bears that are wearing GPS collars. And so we're hoping that we'll have some of that information to report in the next couple of meetings. And then we are also proposing to do some research on dispersal and conflict and habitat use related to fire and forest management. The forest management and fire study will kind of build on potentially the model that Sarah Sells is working on, because it is kind of a habitat movement model. And then we're hoping we can add fire and forest management to that to see how that affects bear movement and habitat use. And with that, I'd like to acknowledge all these folks that help with the field work. And I would be happy to take questions if people have them.
Great, thanks, Cecily. Any questions from our panelists, the subcommittee members? Okay, thanks, Cecily. Hopefully you can hang around. We'll have a public comment opportunity before we adjourn for the day. And you may get some questions there, or maybe in the chat or online as folks might have questions for you. And I always appreciate Cecily's presentations, excuse me, earlier in our meetings. For me anyway, it gives a great visual and an understanding of the monitoring effort, and that report really helps kind of set the stage of where we think and where we know bears are and their populations. And I thought the summary on the work going on in research was really helpful too. There was specifically a number of items in there that we'll be picking up in our work plan discussion about priorities that were identified for 2021. So thanks, Cecily, for all that, and really nice update. So not seeing any questions for Cecily, let's move to Jennifer Fortin Norris on the Southwest Montana DNA project.
Thanks, Randy. I'm going to try to share my screen. So let's see, try to get myself in presentation mode. And oops. Are you seeing the presentation slide or the note slide?
Presentation, I believe.
Oh, great. Well, hopefully this goes smoothly. Let me know if it doesn't work. I just want to touch real fast before I start. The map that Cecily showed, I'm not discussing that today. In general, it gives a buffer around all the verified outliers we have in documented. So, but if you have any questions about that, please feel free to email or message me and let me know. And like Cecily said, that's on the Fish and Wildlife Services Grizzly Bear Recovery page if you want to take a look at it. Today, I'm going to talk about some monitoring efforts that we are going to do this summer in Southwest Montana. So not quite in the NCDE, but hopefully gives us some more information about bears moving between the ecosystems. So as Cecily said, we have had a lot of documented verified outliers. In particular, that number is increasing in recent years, which is really exciting. But when we have these outliers, we oftentimes don't get much information about them. We rarely get DNA, so we don't know which ecosystem they came from. So we are doing a DNA camera survey this summer. Our main goals of this survey are to try to document some where the bears, which ecosystem, whether it's the NCDE or GDYE are the most likely candidates. But I suppose we could get some from the Cavagnac too, where they're coming from, and also, if they're males or females, and with the cameras, whether we're seeing any family groups out there in these areas in particular that are moving towards the Bitterroot ecosystem. So this summer, we are going to have 2 people for the Fish and Wildlife Service that will be seasonal workers starting in mid-May through the end of August. In addition, Defenders of Wildlife is going to help out. Looks like they may just have 1 or 2 people this year. Still have limitations with COVID protocols to run volunteers. We also have 2 people from the Lolo National Forest who are going to help out pretty much full time also. So that greatly increases the number of sites that we will be able to run. So we assume we'll probably get about 60 sites total between all of us, all of our efforts. In addition, there are many other National Forest folks and Fish, Wildlife, and Parks folks that will be jumping in here and there as needed. Largely, these sites are going to be based on previous sightings and recommendations of biologists for what good seasonal habitat is and where we think the bears may be getting to these areas. As I said, we're going to be working mid-May through end of August this year. We hope that if this goes well, that we'll get funding to do future work. This is not a grid sample. So as Cecily mentioned, with her opportunistic samples, this will not give us an estimate of population in any of these areas. This is more along the lines of trying to target areas where we believe grizzly bears may be, or we've had verified samplings, verified outliers in the past. So it won't give us a number, but hopefully it'll give us a lot more information about what is there. We will be using hair corral. So the methods that they have used in the Cavagnac and Selkirks for many, many years are to put up a corral with barbed wire. So usually around 4 trees. You put lure in the center. It's very stinky, but there's no bait or food reward. So bears do not stay in the area long. They usually go under the barbed wire or sometimes over it, leave some hair for us, and investigate the pile and then leave the area because they haven't actually gotten any food. We'll actually have cameras also at those sites to try to document, like I said, if we can see a family group or if we see bears that may have visited but not left hair. We have a pretty standard protocol to avoid open roads, closed roads, trails, and campgrounds. We don't want people to accidentally stumble across the sites or investigate the sites on their own. We do ask that if people do come across the sites to keep their distance, and there will be signs at the sites that have our contact information on it. So if someone does stumble across it, they can call us and ask any questions they may have. We will have, in addition to our phone number, it will have the date that it was put up. And we usually move the sites every 3 to 4 weeks. So these are the very general areas that we're identifying locations in. We are limiting ourselves to Montana this year. And so we will be having, we have a lot of verified locations in the Big Hole area. We've been starting to get some verified, but many unverified in the Sapphire range. So hopefully we can get some more verification there. And then the 9 Mile Divide area to the north of the Bitterroot Recovery Zone. So, right now we're working with the Forest Service and Fish, Wildlife, and Parks biologists to finalize these sites. People will be, all the agencies will be coordinating during the field season to report any new sightings in case there's one we want to be able to respond quickly to and deploy a hair snare corral or camera. We are currently working on a press release and a Q&A sheet and hope to have that approved by the time we start. We did have, thankfully, an opportunity to have all of our great partners with the various agencies review it before we started that. And thankfully, we've found enough cameras to have a lot of sites out there with all the different forests having cameras available. So that's all I had. And so I'm going to stop sharing and see if anybody has any questions.
Great. Any questions for Jennifer? I see some, Jennifer, when you get a moment and you're not presenting, there's some conversation in the chat about some willing participants and volunteers. And then I also want to thank Jennifer. She was really systematic and careful about her outreach and getting to a lot of the agencies and other folks. This hopefully a fairly slow pitch so that folks in the different parts where these efforts will be taking place are able to see them coming. But as you have questions and as this becomes more known, I'm assuming, Jennifer, that folks can address questions directly to you about your plan and efforts and how to participate and any questions that they have.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'll respond to the individual offers in the chat. And yes, if you have future questions, please give me a call or send me an email. I'll put my email. Well, I guess not everybody can see my things in the chat.
If you put it in the Q&A, Jennifer.
Oh, okay. Thanks. I'll put my email in the Q&A in case anybody wants to contact me directly.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. All right, let's, so I know we had a really active legislative session, and in preparation for some of our conversations today, I wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to do a quick update or review there. I'm not sure, and maybe Ken can answer this, and others I'm sure can, whether or not the session has ended. I heard it might be ending today, but we'll find out for sure here in a minute, probably. But with that, I wanted to make sure we had an opportunity to get a legislative update and had an interest both from George Edwards and Ken McDonald. Not sure that it matters who goes first, but maybe we'll start with Ken, and then whatever George has for additional or overlapping, we'll go to George, and we'll see if between them and questions and answer, we can address any of the legislative updates. So Ken, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Randy, and thanks, everybody. To your first question, the legislature's still going. There is thought that they're going to try and end today. They've got a couple budget bills are still trying to finish up. And then once that's done, they will probably hit the road. So it's close. What I was going to talk today are specifically about bills related to grizzly bears, either directly or indirectly, and kind of let you know where things are at. Probably the first one and the biggest one as it relates to grizzly bears is Senate Bill 337. This is a bill that's passed both houses and now is sitting on the governor's desk. And all indications are it will get signed by the governor and move forward. And this is a bill that has two components to it. One says the department may not relocate listed grizzly bears except to a release site previously approved by the Fish and Wildlife Commission for relocation of grizzly bears. So what that means is we need to work with the commission to have them approve any sites. And I'll talk about that a little more in a minute. The other piece to this, which is going to need some work, says the department may respond to grizzly bears listed under the Endangered Species Act that are causing conflict outside of a federal recovery zone. If the bear is to be relocated, the department may not relocate the bear. So in other words, what this says is if there's a bear outside a recovery zone, and I want to make sure it's clear, recovery zone, not the DMA, but the recovery zone, or I think for the NCDE, we refer to that as the PCA, the primary conservation area. If it's outside of that recovery zone, and if it's in a conflict, we can respond and try and address the conflict. If the bear is subsequently trapped, we are not able to move that bear. So we still got a lot of work to do on, so what does that mean? But basically the way we're interpreting that is that means if there's a bear in a trap, it gets handed over to the Fish and Wildlife Service, and it's up to them to decide on relocation or not. So this is going to have this bill will have some pretty significant implications, both to our agency and the land management agencies, as well as Fish and Wildlife Service. So on the first part about needing relocation sites approved by the commission. Oh, actually, the effective date of this bill is March of 2022. So basically a year from now, it'll take effect. So this year it's business as usual, recognizing this legislative intent, but the bill formally becomes effective March of 2022, which means we need to have everything in place by next year to proceed. So what this means is we need to work with land managers between now and next March to identify and propose to our commission potential release sites, and hopefully have a list developed of pre-approved sites. So I know already like our regional bear specialists work with Forest Service, primarily, I think maybe BLM, on identifying sites ahead of a trapping season, and then as bears are trapped, they work at the local level to make sure those sites are still available. What this bill says is we're going to have to identify those areas ahead of time, and we're going to have to get them approved by our Fish and Wildlife Commission. So we're going to have to start working on that quite a bit sooner, ahead of any trapping season. The other part, again, if there's a conflict bear outside of a recovery zone, we can't move it. Fish, Wildlife, and Parks can't move it. We can help with the response, but we can't move it. So that puts it back into the Fish and Wildlife Service court to move it. One thing, ironically, is the Fish and Wildlife Service, obviously, as long as the bears are listed, they're not bounded by Montana law. So could move bears to sites that were outside of those pre-approved sites from our commission. The other part of this one is, in terms of approved sites, is we would need, there could be bears, there are non-conflict bears trapped outside of a recovery zone and moved. Those would also have to be approved by the commission, those relocation sites. So an example that I think about is like the augmentation bears that go to the Cabinet Yaak. We'll need to have our commission approve sites in the Cabinet Yaak where those bears would go. And then any other proposed transplants to what I call new areas or areas that really aren't occupied by grizzly bears would still have to also go through our MIPA process. So like I said, there's quite a bit to this bill that's going to require some collaboration and coordination between our agency and the land management agencies, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and then wildlife services as well. Our normal protocol with grizzly bears that are involved in livestock depredations are, if the decision was made to trap it, if wildlife services catches the bear, they turn it over to our folks to move the bear. If that happens outside of a recovery zone, we couldn't do that. So it'll be up to, Fish and Wildlife Service and Wildlife Services to decide what the outcome of that bear will be. So some work to go between now and next March on identifying those relocation sites and identifying processes if bears are trapped outside of a conflict zone. Outside of recovery zone, I mean. The other thing that, we've had several questions come up about, well, what about a release on site? What about, if it's a, how do you define a conflict and things like that? So some of that is still going to have to get worked out as well. So that's the first grizzly bear bill. The other one is Senate Bill 98. This is one that has passed both houses, and then the governor has issued an amendatory veto that I'll talk about here. It's up to then both houses to either accept or not accept the amendatory veto. What this bill does is just state that basically it's not a crime to kill a grizzly bear that's attacking, killing, or threatening to kill a person or livestock. The amendatory veto adds the words under Montana, basically under Montana law. And so it clarifies that actually it says pursuant to Montana law. So it clarifies that if a person wouldn't be subject to Montana law if they killed a grizzly bear. Again, that's attacking, killing, or threatening to kill a person or livestock. Obviously, the state laws can't supersede the federal laws. So as long as they're listed, grizzly bears would still have that federal protection, but a person wouldn't be prosecuted under state law if the amendatory veto goes through. So as of this morning, the amendatory veto, that language pursuant to Montana law had passed the Senate, and it was going to get considered by the House today. So we'll see what happens with that one. If for some reason the House doesn't pass it, then my understanding is the law still, it stays in its original form, and then it's up to the governor to either sign it, veto it, or let it pass without signing it. There's one other grizzly bear related law. It's Senate Joint Resolution 18, which has several different pieces of recommendations and findings by the legislature related to grizzly bears. It's similar to resolutions that have passed in previous years, and this is intended to go to Interior Department, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and our congressional delegation. And it has several therefores, includes the legislature calls on the Fish and Wildlife Service to revise the 1993 grizzly bear plan and reevaluate grizzly bear recovery zone efficacy across all range. Legislature requests the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service create a statewide distinct population segment that includes all of Montana's grizzly bear recovery zones for purposes of delisting. They asked the Fish and Wildlife Service to develop a new management plan pursuant to Section 4D of the Endangered Species Act They would aim to resolve conflicts between bears and humans within the NCDE and other recovery zones. And the legislature calls on Montana's congressional delegation basically to help return management of grizzly bears to the state and exempt delisting of grizzly bear populations from judicial review, which is what happened with wolves. So those three were the ones directly related to grizzly bears. There's a couple related to livestock loss I think George will talk about, so I'll skip those. And then there was a few bills where grizzly bears were identified as an issue in hearings that are also moving through that just wanted you to be aware of. There's House Bill 225, which establishes wolf trapping dates. That says the commission may authorize a wolf trapping season that opens the first Monday after Thanksgiving, which is typically around the 1st of December, and closes March 15th of the following calendar year, and allows the commission to adjust dates for specific wolf management units based on regional recommendations. So this is one, our wolf trapping season has typically started in the middle of December, mainly because of concern about potential trapping of grizzly bears before they're into hibernation in early December. So this kind of is something we'll be looking at in terms of our wolf seasons and how do you mesh this bill with grizzly bear concerns and wolf concerns and things like that. There's also House Bill 224 that allows for snaring of wolves and basically says trapping seasons must allow for the use of snares by the holder of a trapping license. So basically what that says is wherever there's a wolf trapping season, wolf snares would also be allowed. So if those dates that I just talked about are in effect, then snaring would be allowed as well as trapping. Another one that has passed both houses now and is sitting on the governor's desk would allow for hound hunting and a chase season for black bears. And it specifically says a person may hunt black bears during the spring season with the aid of a dog or dogs as authorized by the commission, and may pursue black bears with a dog or dogs during a training season from the end of the spring season through June 15th, as authorized by the commission. So we're going to have to try and balance some of these wolf and hound hunting bills with grizzly bears. You notice in all three of those, as well as the relocation, there's a reference to the commission. There were a couple bills related to the Fish and Wildlife Commission. House Bill 163 and Senate Bill 306 both increased the commission from 5 members to 7 members. Those seven members would then would overlap with the FWP regional boundaries. So we'd have 1 commissioner per boundary or per FWP region. And then Senate Bill 306 as well added that at least 3 of those 7 members must be engaged in agricultural production and defines that. The 5 to 7 bill takes effect on October of 2021, and the requirement for members to be engaged in agriculture takes effect January of 2022. So currently we have 5. By this fall, we'll have 7, and I'm guessing they would just go ahead and add that agriculture component at the same time. Additionally, the legislature confirms commissioners. We have 4 new commissioners that were appointed by Governor Gianforte. They had their first commission meeting as a group in April. Their next one's going to be in June. So we're working with those folks. We'll get 2 more in October, it looks like. And so we'll be working with commission on some of these issues like wolf trapping and snaring and trying to address grizzly bears and grizzly bear relocation. A couple other related bills. This is actually on the positive side, is related to budgets. So in House Bill 2, which is it's the state's main budget bill that funds all of the agencies and the personnel. Within House Bill 2, we had a request this year that they're called decision packages. So we had a grizzly bear decision package to increase our capacity to deal with bear conflict and also the monitoring component. And so far that decision package is gone through. We had asked for FTE or people, as well as the funding to help with the grizzly bear program. The both Governor Bullock and then moving forward, we were told no new FTE, but we could ask for the funding and use that for modified FTE or contractors. And that funding so far has gone through. And so that funding request included additional technician help in Kalispell, Missoula, and Shoto, and a bump in their operations to help with, particularly with some of the supplies like electric fencing and just getting around as well. So if this goes through, like I said, it's almost to the end, is we would have additional tech time and working under Manley, Wenham, Jamie Jonkel, and then in Shoto. And and some of that is stuff we've been doing, like in Missoula, Eli Hampson's position has been kind of cobbled together. This would give a little more stability to that funding. We also asked for a bear tech specifically to focus on the Bitterroot. We know bears are heading into the Bitterroot, and we've got even just with black bears, we have a lot of conflict. So we should be able to get a position that's going to focus on bear conflict in the Bitterroot. And then for the monitoring program that Cecily just talked about, we were asked for a person to sort of be a coordinator of the whole trapping program. Cecily, we've been stretching Cecily in all directions. So that's in there, a position, we call it a trapping coordinator for the monitoring program, and an additional tech to help with the monitoring program. And then a pretty good bump in the operations to help cover some of the funding shortfalls for the monitoring program. So that was a very, very positive development in our budget that should help us, maybe try and get ahead of the bear conflicts a little bit instead of chasing them. The other budget piece, it's related a little less directly, but is House Bill 5, which is the long range building program. That's where our Habitat Montana program is, which is the program that contains an earmark on hunting licenses to fund habitat conservation, primarily through easements and acquisitions. There was concern that might get messed with during the session. So far, it has gone through intact. We have several projects in the works that would benefit grizzly bears in the NCDE. The largest of those are ones working with some of the industrial forest owners to put conservation easements on some of the working forests in Northwest Montana to keep them as working forest rather than getting subdivided or sold. So that was really good news from our perspective. And then one other one people probably were tracking but may have lost track of is the marijuana initiative. So that was House Bill 701. I see that one has gone to the governor's desk, and it's been messed around with off and on throughout the session. The final version includes there will be a 20% tax on recreational marijuana, and that tax the first $6 million will go into a fund called the HEART account, which I think is for addiction treatments, things like that. So after the first 6 million, then 20% of the remainder will go to the Habitat Montana program to be used solely for funding for wildlife habitat. 4% will go to state park account, 4% to trails and facilities, and then 4% to our non-game wildlife account. So those all have potential to have some collateral benefits for bears as well. So all in all, on the budget front, things look really good. So again, they're just finishing up the final budget bills and some final bills. And then, like I said, maybe out as early as this afternoon. So that's what I have. I'm happy to answer any questions, or I can wait till George is done and we see what time we have left.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. I think we'll let George jump in next, and then we'll have all that legislative stuff in front of us at once if there's questions, or they might be interrelated or connected.
Great.
So, thanks, Ken. George.
Hey, guys. Livestock Loss Board ran 3 bills through the legislature this session. The first one was SB 26. And that relates to tribal agreements. Where this has an impact as far as grizzly bears are related is it strips the requirement that a tribe have a grizzly bear management plan equivalent to the state's plan in order for us to pay compensation on livestock losses. And as the bears are moving further and further east, that would eventually start hitting some of the tribes we currently do not have agreements with and do not have the wildlife personnel to create those management plans. So in essence, no matter where they're at in the state, we pay ranchers equally, whether they're on tribal lands or not. The second bill was SB 27, and it came up a lot in the Governor's Grizzly Bear Advisory Council about a multiplier and whether we can or could or cannot. And the law did allow us to do so, but it was written so vaguely that it was not clear to the people, and that became very apparent during the Grizzly Council. So our board had multiplier added to the law. However, we do not have money to pay a multiplier, and so we have no ability to pay one. It was just to get a law clarification and to get everybody on the same page. The big one was SB 58, where we asked for $100,000 for loss prevention projects. That's for grizzly bears and wolves. And we had tried in prior sessions to get a secure funding source. This time we were successful, and all 3 of our bills have been signed by the governor. That funding would not be available until July 1st, the new budget year. Our board needs to hold a meeting, and I've been trying to work to get them together to come up with some parameters as far as matching requirements and that for the state funding. But that's the good news. We have money for loss prevention for grizzly bears for the first time that we can dedicate to loss prevention. My update's very short and sweet. That's it.
That was short and sweet, George. Thanks. I've got Ken and George available for questions if anybody has them for either. Okay, and then if you guys can, hopefully you're available when we get to the public comment portion. As questions might pop up there, we can try to address them there as well.
Sure.
Will do.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
So with that, let's turn to Rich Harris on the Montana Grizzly Bear Planning update. Rich?
Thanks, Randy. Thanks for the opportunity to provide an update and to participate. For those, I'll just give a 3.5-minute intro for those who might not know who I am. I was brought on to Fish, Wildlife, and Parks about 1.5 years ago after retiring from a position in Washington, where I was supervising management of some ungulate species. But I do have a background in grizzly bears and actually started working on some aspects of grizzly bear conservation back as early as 1983. And during my time as the working for DNRC in the position that Ross now holds and has held for many years, I was a member of the NCDE kind of technical working group. And then I subsequently did some work with the IGBST on the Yellowstone work as well. So an update on the planning process from the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks side of things. Following the completion of the Governor's Council, which I think you all know about, last August, there was a period of some consideration and some back and forth about how the state should proceed. But I'm able to report to you now that we have a plan pending before the director's office. I want to emphasize that this is not an approved outreach plan or getting the planning process off the ground, but it's something we're proposing and are hopeful that we can get approval from the director's office and start with. This process would begin with what I'm calling a quasi-scoping, which would be reaching out to Montanans for additional input on what the plan should say. This will be a written document. If COVID protocols allow, we would also like to have listening sessions in various small communities throughout Western Montana. And I'll return to that quasi-scoping idea in just a moment. But to complete what we are proposing for the process, following input from the public on that, we would develop a draft EIS, full long document that would include alternatives, and these alternatives would be responsive to the additional input we'd received during the quasi-scoping. And that draft EIS in turn would go out for a second round of public input and review. And based on that second set of public comments, we would then provide a final EIS and decision document sometime later in the future. So why have quasi-scoping and not just scoping? Typically in scoping, I think of the question being asked of the public, well, what are the issues? And I think at this point, to be frank, it would be disingenuous for Fish, Wildlife and Parks to say we don't know what the issues are in grizzly bears. We've been working on grizzly bears for decades. We have the advantage of the advice provided by the Grizzly Bear Advisory Council. We also have a recently completed human dimensions study of Montanans' attitudes toward grizzly bears. That's very informative. And we have all kinds of input we get all the time. So I think we know what the issues are. But what we don't have is a specific input from the public on what should the plan say. Why not go forward just with a draft EIS with saying, oh, here's what we propose to do. What do you think about that? And again, I think that we would be disserving our public if we didn't give them an opportunity to kind of give us some input before we even crafted what we thought would be our alternatives or our best alternative. So we think that this is a good way to make sure that we've got sufficient public interest and public input. And the question would be posed essentially like this, rather than just being regular scoping, where we would say, tell us what you think. What should we do? What do you think the issues are? Our idea here is to provide a skeleton, something that the public can get their arms around to say, okay, in a preliminary way, this is what the department is telling us they're thinking they've heard. Have we got it right? Saying to the public, this is what we think we've heard you say, but we haven't specifically asked what should the plan say. This is your opportunity to say, yeah, I like that part, I don't like that part, fully expecting that anything we write at this point will get all kinds of responses, people saying it's too much or not enough of any particular proposed action we might take. So in the quasi-scoping would begin with a statement of what we're up to and why we're here. And that would, the very short version of that is, as I think you all know, we're in a very different world than we were 15 years ago when we last went through a major planning process in the state on grizzly bears. No news to anybody on this in this meeting, but some people still may not be aware that we've got grizzly bears in all kinds of places that we didn't used to. That provides much more opportunity and positivity for the possibility of connectivity between population cores, but it also obviously produces a lot more human dimension, human conflict with grizzly bears. And so how do we balance these new elements on the block compared to what we knew 10, 15 years ago? That's the rationale we'll be presenting to the public. We'll then articulate the issues that we think are relevant to the planning effort. And then we will provide kind of a very draft skeleton. This is what we think we've heard from the public, and we'll do that in the format of 2 tables, rather than having a long narrative that discusses what we're thinking we would do, and eyes would glaze over because it would be so long, to kind of systematize this in tabular format, and following for each cell of each issue that says, here's what we're thinking we would do based on what we've heard. The next column over would be, well, how do we think we've heard that? What makes us think the public has given us this kind of information? And the first column would be what we've heard from the Grizzly Bear Advisory Council. That report's been out about 8 months now. And then there'd be a column saying what we've heard to the degree it's relevant from the human dimensions work done by the University of Montana in conjunction with our folks. And then another column for kind of things we've heard from the legislature, from other people writing to us, from our understanding. Then there'd be a second table that would repeat the same, for each issue, would repeat the same column that would say, here's what we think we've heard, here's what we're thinking we might do. But then there would be columns that would describe constraints and sideboards that we think are relevant to our planning. We are not free to do any old thing, and we'd like the public to be aware that this is a plan with certain kind of parameters within which we have to fit. And the first column there would be the obvious one, Endangered Species Act, still a listed species. We can't propose things that are at variance with the Endangered Species Act. Next column will be state laws and state regulations. Some of this is new, that coming out just now, that Ken alluded to, and some of it has been around for some years. And then the other major part of what constrains what we can do is interagency agreements, to which Fish, Wildlife, and Parks is a party or a signatory, and foremost amongst those being the conservation strategies that we are a party to. So that would be sort of sideboards. And so the idea here is, in our scoping, is not to just allow, to encourage people to just go off on any kind of tangent, but to clarify that we're trying to build a plan that has certain parameters, certain constraints, and the best advice we can get from the public as to what they think this should say relevant to that. Again, I would emphasize that this is a proposed path forward that we are hopeful to get approval from the director's office on, but do not have that final approval at this point. So what ultimately comes out may differ from this in some respects, minor or major, I don't know yet. So that's kind of where we're at with regard to our planning for a statewide Fish, Wildlife, and Parks plan on grizzly bears. And I can try to respond to questions if there are any.
Thanks, Rich. Questions from subcommittee members for Rich on that update on the planning effort? Great. Thanks, Rich. And I want to recognize your patience through this process. I know you were hired for the planning effort, and at various steps through the process, whether it was the Grizzly Bear Advisory Council or upcoming legislative session and changes in administration and the rest, for each one of those steps, there was good reason to hold for just a minute before we hit go. And as we're hearing today, the way that plan might come out reflects some of those changes throughout those different steps. And at some point here, you'll be let loose to manage the planning effort, and we'll get this public feedback, and it will be as live and valid as any plan is for us until we get new frameworks and new constructs and things to react to. So, but very much appreciate your efforts, Rich, and look forward to seeing those next steps as they come out.
Thanks. And I'll listen in for the rest of this. So if there are questions later on, I can try to be responsive to that.
Great. Thanks, Rich. All right, let's turn to Ben Kennard with the HCP update. And Ben, we did get a snapshot of that during introduction. Sorry again for setting you up for that. So if you could roll through that again, I think it'd be helpful for us to hear it with that context. And then if there's any questions, we'll have a couple minutes there as well. So Ben.
Okay, sorry for that misfire. So again, the Burlington Northern Railway Habitat Conservation Plan. The railway has applied for an incidental take permit that would allow the take of grizzly bears, and in this case, mortality, incidental to their operations. In other words, once they do all the practices that they can minimize the chance of mortality or mitigate for any mortality. If their plan meets issuance criteria, then the Fish and Wildlife Service would issue a permit. I want to be clear that the Fish and Wildlife Service is not entertaining and not authorized to control the existence of the railway, the operations of the railway. What our decision space is their plan adequate? So the plan has been long in coming. The draft went out for public comment in January. Public comment closed in February. We're pouring through dozens of comments. And depending on the category of the comments, some of those are directed at Burlington Northern and their operations and whether they can entertain changes. For example, there's an ask about fencing the corridor. There's an ask about putting some sort of strip of warning devices along the corridor. They need to address those questions. Other categories of comments are biological. They point to science. Those will be addressed by the Fish and Wildlife Service, most likely in our biological opinion. Depending on the significance of the changes to the plan itself, if it's significant enough, the plan would go back out for comment. If not, if it's just tweaks around the edges, then we could proceed with our findings document, which outlines whether their plan meets the issuance criteria and issue a permit. As I said earlier, the best case scenario is probably very late spring, early summer. Again, it depends on all the review, depends on the significance of the responses we got from BNSF to make some changes and things like that. So a lot out of our control. So with that, I can take any questions.
Great, thanks, Ben. So any questions or comments or thoughts for Ben on the HCP? So I know from my perspective, when I first started getting involved with the NCDE a number of years ago, the mortalities there were significant and really visible. And without getting into the weeds and without getting into your process, I know from my perspective, it sure looked like a huge effort and a lot of years to come to some agreement there. So hats off to you guys for that effort and for getting something pulled together. I know that wasn't without a lot of attention and a lot of concerned people trying to pay attention to that. So really appreciate it.
Thanks to all the bear specialists who chimed in and helped shape this thing. So appreciate all the help.
Great. Pausing just another sec to make sure there aren't any other inputs for Ben. All right, so hey, Dylan, I'm not sure, I got to look at my list, but we're next moving to the Missoula County Transportation Co-op. And do we have Kylie Paul joining us now?
Oh, let me look. If Kylie, if you're out there and I've missed you, raise your hand and I will admit you. I don't see her in the attendees list. I know Joe, I think Joe, you were part of this discussion and Joe should be in.
Yeah, so Kylie communicated with me earlier this morning and she was ready to present. So we'll give it just a second here, but if for some reason we don't have Kylie joining us, we can shift.
Yeah, Kylie, if you're out there and you're in the attendees list and I don't see you, if you could update your name to make sure that I recognize you.
This is Jamie. I'll give Kylie a call real quick too.
That's great. Thanks, Jamie.
And we're a little early too, so she might not have been ready to jump on. I think we have time. So I think what I'm going to ask us to do, if this works for everybody, since we are ahead of schedule and we're looking to grab Kylie, let's just take a couple minute break here. So it's 10:45. If folks can be back a little before 10:55, that'd be really helpful, I think. And we'll see if we can round up Kylie. Actually, why don't we just take a break till 11 just for clean accounting. So let's circle back and be back on by 11. We'll take a quick break here and we'll look for Kylie's presentation before we break for lunch.
Sounds good, Randy. And I'll just share my screen showing the agenda for folks.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Oh, hey, Randy, if you're there, I did get a hold of Kylie and she'll be on just a little bit before 11.
Yeah. Thanks, Jamie, for the heads up. I'll see you guys here in about 10 minutes.
Randy, I just added Kylie into as a panelist.
Great, thanks, Dylan. So it's 11 o'clock. I'm going to assume we have folks back. If not, I'll assume they'll join us as soon as they can. So thanks everybody for joining us again after a quick break. And apologies to Kylie if I've taken you away from something 15 minutes before you were ready. But Kylie, if you would, maybe introduce yourself and then we can roll into your update on transportation in this greater Missoula area.
Absolutely, no problem. Yeah, I should have been on and listening just in case that might happen. Sorry about that. My name is Kylie Paul. I work for Missoula County in the Community and Planning Services Department, Parks, Trails, and Open Lands program. I'm the Natural Resource Specialist. So I'm here to talk about wildlife highway connectivity work that's been going on here recently. And that's actually not super related necessarily to my job per se, or let me say it a different way. I've been working on this stuff for a whole bunch of years before I took on this job as well. But it is of course related as I'm the natural resource specialist, and these are natural resources that we're talking about here. And this is a larger group than me anyway. So thanks for this opportunity. Wildlife mortality and habitat impacts related to highways are an issue of concern for anybody worrying about wildlife and about human safety. And it's nothing new to you folks who work on grizzly bears, since grizzly mortality from roads can be quite significant. And some of you may have attended the Montana Wildlife and Transportation Summit that happened in Helena in 2018, where more than 160 people came together and came up with strategies, or tried to address these issues. And that catalyzed the Montana Wildlife and Transportation Steering Committee with representatives from Montana Department of Transportation, or MDT, Fish, Wildlife, Parks, and an alliance of conservation organizations focused on that issue. The steering committee has been meeting quarterly since 2019. Meanwhile, there are also more regionally focused efforts that have been coming together. Recently, there's this new regional effort here based or focused in the region around Missoula, and I'm going to talk about that now. This group, we don't really have a name, maybe Missoula Regional Connectivity Group, that's what we've been self-naming ourselves, it originated from some well-timed conversations and energies with various agencies, organizations, and individuals in early 2020. And that group is seeking collaborative solutions. So the intent of the group is to advance tools out on the ground around this part of the state and take some proactive steps to do so in order to help wildlife move across highways, humans safely move along the roads. And at this point, we're in an early stage as a group. Again, that geographic scope is generally Western Montana centralized from Missoula. And people involved are folks from MDT, Fish, Wildlife, Parks, Missoula County, land trusts, wildlife conservation organizations, fisheries conservation organizations, a local engineering firm, and so on. So it's a pretty streamlined group with considerable expertise on wildlife connectivity and transportation issues. The group is not focused just on one species. So we're trying to find those areas that we can address both collision zones, which tend to be with ungulates, and looking to address habitat connectivity needs for species of high conservation concern, which could of course include grizzly bears or other smaller species and different critters. The group is looking both big and small scale. So of course, the highly effective but larger scale projects like overpasses and underpasses, they can often take a major effort or take a long time to get out on the ground. We're keeping an eye to those types of projects, of course, but we are initially primarily focusing on smaller scale projects that can still help wildlife move across or under the road. And that small scale approach also helps differentiate our effort a bit from that statewide approach taken by the steering committee I mentioned earlier. And we're excited to work on a smaller scale project first, we know that MDT can accept outside funds and collaborate on projects that are spearheaded by others, but MDT doesn't currently have a whole lot of experience in doing that. And by partnering and getting a small project done here, we're hoping to provide that small stepping stone to more efficiently and effectively pursue collaborative projects, regardless to their size or complexity. Okay, so what does that mean? What are we doing? Well, these smaller scale projects that we're aiming to accomplish could include things like minor pathway improvements under an existing bridge or through culverts that some critters can't walk through as easily because of riprap or whatnot. Minor fence modifications to enhance access to an already existing crossing structure, or portable dynamic variable message signs. Also, mid-scale projects like adding wing fencing at existing bridges or culverts that channel wildlife to those safe locations. Culvert enhancements for critters, like adding a small, again, more small material on riprap, or an elevated shelf for small mammals to go along existing culverts. And then an example of longer term, large scale projects would be new structures like overpasses or underpasses, and working with private landowners to conserve private lands along key areas. So neat, those are neat projects, but how do we accomplish these projects? So some projects that we could complete just with some volunteer time in the field, with some modifications to existing bridges or fencing and collaboration with each other and with MDT. Some we can accomplish by providing information, providing more person hours, providing momentum and energy and funding to MDT. And then those large scale projects like private land conservation or creation of an underpass or overpass, that can be accomplished with this group by planning ahead, by continuing these conversations and idea sharing with the right people at the right time. And that could happen on its own, but having a group where we can all come together and regularly meet can be a really useful tool. So we have an ear and an energy at the right time. Okay, so where are we at right now? We're at early stages. We've put our collective heads and information together to determine focal areas to look into more closely. And we're working now at this point to determine which stretches of highway in the region that we will focus on and which specific projects we'll focus on initially. To do that, we've considered information like whether the area of interest contains areas with high conservation importance for wildlife, high human and wildlife safety risks, existing bridges or culverts that could be modified, upcoming highway construction projects, and then potential partnerships, private land conservation development threats, and so on. And at this stage, we're honing in on a few of those small scale projects, but we'll also be exploring some opportunities to advance these further bigger projects at various scales. And we look forward to creating and maintaining momentum. And if you're interested in learning more or being involved, please feel free to connect with myself or Randy or Joe Weekend. That's what I got. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Kylie. Joe, did you want to add anything or have some thoughts as well?
Looks like my camera is on the fritz. I was wondering about that. I tried to clean the lens. Okay, I'm just gonna shut that off. Yeah, I thank you, Kylie, for doing that. And, you know, thanks for being the team leader and the energy that you bring to the group. It's greatly appreciated and very much needed. I think, you know, the one little bit that I would just elaborate on, or, you know, Kylie touched on it, is you know, these small groups are popping up in a few focal areas around the state. And I think the one thing that the Missoula regional group is really trying to make sure that we don't do is we don't want to be tripping over the statewide prioritization processes that are moving along. And we certainly don't want those statewide efforts tripping over our efforts. We want to complement that statewide work to prioritize across the, just not across the state, but across species. What are the real needs of the state? Most collisions, as Kylie touched on, are ungulates, and white-tailed deer, far and above all other species are getting hit on a daily basis. And, if you look at the entire state, possibly an hourly basis, there's just an astronomical number of white-tailed deer getting hit on our highways in Montana. And so, as we work at this regional focal level, I think this group, the Missoula Regional Group, has done an exceptional job of really making sure that what we're doing is going to complement and boost other statewide priority efforts. And, some of the things we're looking at the small scale, like Kylie said, that stepping stone in how to work collaboratively, provide that framework, that guide to more effectively and efficiently, get things on the ground, whether they're small scale or large scale. Every little movement forward that we make at this level, I think is just going to continue to complement and help guide and bring things along more effectively at a statewide level. And I hope in the end that's something that really comes out of this group, is that we're able to boost that statewide effort.
Yeah, that's a great addition, Joe. And following that Transportation Steering Committee and the work that they did, it was a really cool effort between Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and Montana Department of Transportation. And then the third leg of that are all the non-government organizations with expertise around wildlife, but also the NGOs with expertise around transportation issues, both in Montana and nationally. And getting all those folks in one room, it was clear that everybody had the drive and interest. And I think that kind of mechanical approach, that prioritization, looking at data sharing, looking at ways to bring processes in our mutual business between FWP and Department of Transportation, it really brought us forward a lot of years in trying to make sure that we do a really good job addressing transportation and potential conflicts. And so that overarching statewide strategy, implementation of efficiencies between the two agencies, sharing of data, database systems, were really kind of systemic things, like statewide big things that we could make some advances on. And then as they've been trying to identify those statewide priorities, potentially aligning resources to those priorities. But then I think from my perspective, it also seemed like locally, and this might not be the way to characterize it, we had in the Missoula area this drive and this interest, kind of a heart and soul on what's happening here locally, and a lot of interest and drive. And I think you described it well. I don't think it's a matter of chicken or egg, like the steering committee statewide has to get their stuff done, figured out before we can move. And similarly, the things we're learning while trying to pull folks together and work at a more localized scale are helping to inform the steering committee. So maybe rather than a chicken or egg, it's a chicken and egg. And the emphasis being on communicating so that we're kind of lockstep as we move forward and identify these solutions. And then the other thing I wanted to say that I really appreciated that came out of the Transportation Steering Committee, as well as this local group, sometimes we get fixated on one big transportation win, like it's a big giant project out in the future. But I think we're finding layers of opportunities at these different scales, and we can make a lot of advancements in goods at a much smaller scale in a lot of different places, and not losing sight of big opportunities and getting those in the queue if we can identify what those are. But a hats off to Kylie. I know she is slowly becoming the lead of this group, and I feel her, I feel her anxiety as her energy and interest in coordinating us and keeping on track means that she's shouldering some more of that, and very much appreciate her energy and her interest. And for her coming today and sharing this update, just so that we can get on the radar as folks are thinking about transportation and impacts to grizzly bears. So I'll pause there to see what kind of questions, if any, from subcommittee members. Not seeing anything. Give another second here just to make sure for those who are slow on the mute button or the raised hand. Okay, great. Well, thanks, Kylie, for taking the time to join us today. We have agenda items tomorrow talking about NCDE priorities, work plan priorities. And these transportation elements were identified both in the mortality subcommittee, which identified some priorities, as well as overarching things that have been identified in the past, some of which led to us asking several years ago for a representative from Department of Transportation to serve on the subcommittee. And that's when we invited Joe to join us. And so we've seen a natural growth of this engagement on the transportation front for the NCDE. And I just love seeing that it's gaining some traction, and we're finding some ways to keep it moving. So thanks again, Kylie, for joining us.
Sure, thanks everyone.
So a quick check-in with everybody on this agenda. So we're currently a full half an hour ahead of schedule, and it's as 11:15 or so right now. Originally, we were planning on breaking for an early lunch at 11:45 and coming back at 12:30. And so I think I need some input for how you'd like to manage our agenda for the rest of the day. So we have planned about an hour for agency roundtable and updates after lunch, and public comment. Those are the two main agenda items we have left for today. I can see a couple possible options. One would be that we break early for lunch and may either come back early or have a longer lunch. Alternatively, we could start into the roundtable discussion before lunch. I'm not sure if we would get through all of those. I do worry a little about significantly changing agenda items for fear of losing our public who are trying to pay attention, or anybody who's trying to follow along, that they might not keep up with us. We could possibly do a bit of a hybrid and take some public comment before we break for lunch and then come back after. So what are we thinking? Ideas?
Randy, I like the idea if there's any public questions but I guess Hillary just said the opposite. So.
No, I don't know. That's a good idea, Lori. I'm just thinking people might, like you mentioned, Randy, if people are waiting for public comment, or they also might be interested in the agency update. So I just think if we keep the time for those items on schedule, then we can either break early or take comments or questions now.
Maybe questions on anything that was presented.
Okay.
Public.
Yeah, that sounds like a good hybrid. So maybe if we dedicate a few minutes towards, maybe 15 minutes towards public comment right now, not taking away anything from this afternoon. So those who want to participate in public comment or might join us late today for that opportunity. But that will allow folks to bail before lunch and not come back if they want to address something that was brought up this morning. So Dylan, can you help facilitate some public comment? Maybe we'll just take it till, if needed, till about 11:30, and then we'll break early for lunch and we'll talk about when we want to return.
Yeah, sounds great. So if anybody who has a comment or a question who's out there viewing, please raise your hand, and then I'll be able to allow you to talk. Looks like there's a question. So Trina Joe Bradley asked, Cecily, can you expound on my question a little more if there's time, like actual numbers maybe? Now, I think your question was about tracking the movement of bears east into the prairie and west towards the Selkirk Cabinet Yaak, and how those movements compare to each other. Cecily, are you available to kind of dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, so, you know, we have radio collared bears that we track on both sides of the ecosystem, and we're able to see whether or not they're making movements into, for example, the Cabinet Yaak. We have not detected, you know, a radio collared bear that's made a movement over there. I didn't really talk about the DNA work that relates to movements between the NCDE and the Cabinet Yaak, because we're kind of still working on that a little bit, but you know, we have some evidence that there could be some bears moving. And then in terms of, you know, bears on the east front, you know, the data that we have is, you know, based on the radio collared bears, which are collared for both research and management purposes. A lot of the bears on the very outside edge are more management bears than research bears. And, you know, I think that Wesley has some, you know, recent observations of bears that are pretty far west, or east rather, I'm sorry. But they have not, they're not at the density of points to change the trajectory of, or the outside edge of the bear distribution. So I guess I just need to understand a little more what you're asking.
Yeah, so Trina Joe, if you want to clarify the question or type it in, I guess raise your hand if you'd like to clarify the question, or if you want to type it into the chat or the Q&A. I guess while Trina Joe's maybe going to add that in there, it looks like there's a question from Sarah Lundstrom. And this is for you, Rich. Question for Rich: knowing that the statewide planning proposal still needs to be approved, what is the hoped for timeline and for the planning process?
We've suggested some timelines to the director's office, but since we haven't heard back yet, it's premature to be able to say whether we'll reach those timelines. So certainly, we'd like to get this up and going, but I'm unfortunately unable to provide you any more guidance on how long it's all going to take. Usually longer than it seems like it ought to. That's kind of something that comes with the territory, I guess. I don't know if Ken or Randy, if you have any more insight into how to best answer that question.
Yeah, sorry, Rich. I don't know. I think that's probably where we are. Just the actual time to kick it off and when that actually happens versus the amount of time we take for the various steps are really a little up in the air. So I think the big update for folks today is that we do intend to bring that planning effort forward. Would expect that to start here in the near future. Guessing for me, that means maybe sometime this spring for an early summer for a start period, but less defined on the actual timeline steps in each part of that process. That just off the cuff, Rich.
Thanks, Randy. So back to you, Cecily. Trina Joe clarified a little bit. Her comment is, so my theory is that grizzly bears are moving east faster than they are moving west because of ease of food sources. Am I right?
So I guess I don't want to jump on a conclusion yet. Given that we are about to, you know, embark on this study of bear use of grain bins and bear use of that prairie habitat over the next couple of years, I'd like to potentially say, give me a couple years and I'll tell you. But I think the lack of people on the east side of the ecosystem compared to the west side of the ecosystem probably plays a part in bear movement. And I think that, you know, the movement between the NCDE and the Cabinet Yaak might be somewhat affected by the reservoir between them. So there might be some other factors that relate to that. You know, we're trying to look at both in terms of our analysis of bear expansion and our study of the grain bin use per se. You know, we're trying to get a feel for how bears are using that prairie landscape so that we can predict what sort of movement patterns they're making. But I would also say that bears in the prairie are more visible. And so I think that there is a chance that we detect their movements more than we do bears that are moving through a forested landscape.
Great, Cecily. And so, and then Trina looks like for clarifying, she's saying, are you saying grizzly bears aren't moving west because of a lack of people? I think you said the other way, right? The people, the disturbance of people on the west side, right?
Yeah, I mean, the Flathead Valley is a pretty highly human densely populated area compared to the East Front. So the bears do kind of have to maneuver around people to make those westward movements. The East Front is a very low populated area, relatively speaking. And so that could have some influence on their movement rates on the two sides.
Great, thanks for clarifying that, Cecily. And so then Keith Hammer, I saw your hands up, but then you also typed a question in the chat. So if
I think I can take that one, Dylan, just looking at it.
Yeah, do you mind reading it? Because others might not be able to see it.
Yeah, you bet, Dylan. So Keith's question is, at the November meeting, it was said that Kathy Yaak would get her habitat monitoring reports approved and post them and past reports. I've not been able to find them on the NCDE website. Have they been posted? So yeah, just as of yesterday or the day before, I got an update from Kathy regarding those previous reports. And what we had agreed to in November is she would give the agencies involved a chance to review those reports before they were posted, just to make sure that they were consistent with what the agencies understood the information to be. And she's gone through that process and is ready to post those. So tomorrow, Kathy Yaak is on the agenda to talk about any additional updates in her reporting. And I think she was going to address it then on just advising on posting those reports. So I do believe she's ready to post those, and she'll have a little bit of an update on that tomorrow.
That's correct.
Great, thank you, Randy.
Hey, Dylan, can I add one more?
Yeah, go ahead.
One more bit to my answer to Trina. So the other thing that I think is important when we think about kind of the physical distance of the range expansion on the east side versus the west side is that the bear movement out into the prairie is very highly associated with the river corridors. And so it's a linear movement out. And so it gets exaggerated to a certain degree because they're moving out this very linear corridor, not across a kind of a wide swath of habitat. And so I think that comes into play in terms of looking at the change in distribution over time between the east side and the west side. I hope that makes sense.
And Dylan and Cecily, this is Jim, and you'll hear from Chris Temple. It's not all bad news on the west. We have spent an incredible amount of money and energy with partners on this committee to work on conservation easements between the Cabinet Yaak and the NCDE. So the table is being set for future existing and or future an increase in movements west. So and that you'll hear more about that tomorrow. And that's pretty important work that we've done with all the agency and tribal partners on this group.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And thanks, Cecily. Yeah, Chris Temple, who will be giving that presentation tomorrow, it's pretty amazing when she zooms out to look at the landscape scale habitat conservation that's underway. So any other questions out there? If you do, I'll pause a minute. And if anybody has a question, raise their hand. Okay, Brian, I see you've got your hand raised. So Brian, I'm going to unmute you. If you could please state your name, where you're from, and if you're affiliated with an organization.
Yeah, Brian Peck, and I'm from Columbia Falls. I'm an independent wildlife consultant. And my question was for Cecily. I'm wondering if her program this morning is part of her 2020 report, and if that's going to be posted soon or perhaps already has been posted to the website.
Yes, Brian, it's very much tied to what is in our annual report. We are trying our best to finish it up. 2020 was a little bit difficult to get all the data from all of our partners. And so it got a little bit more delayed than usual. And then doing the bear distribution mapping, we wanted to make sure we had all the information for that as well. But I'm hoping that we will have a completed annual report in the next couple of weeks. And right now, hopefully Dylan might be able to help answer this question, but hopefully we are redesigning the FWP website right now. And so sometimes it's been harder to find things, but hopefully Dylan can find us a way to post it. So.
Yeah, no, thanks, Cecily. We've redeveloped the FWP website, and I'm going to do a little walkthrough tomorrow during my IEO update to kind of show everybody where everything is and help folks navigate this new website a little bit. So thanks for bringing that up. Brian, do you have any follow-up question there?
No.
Great. Well, thank you for the question. And then Keith Hammer, I see your hand is up. So Keith, if you could state your name, where you're from, and if you're the organizations you're affiliated with.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I'll follow up on Brian's question. Or a similar question, will Cecily's PowerPoint presentation from today be posted sometime soon? And I would presume on the NCDE webpage.
Yep, the plan is like usual. I'll be getting the presentations from each of these speakers and posting them on the NCDE website under the meetings section. So yeah, yep, these will be up there, Keith, and I'll be trying to get those up as soon as possible following the meeting, but usually takes a day or two to wrangle everything.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Hey, Dylan.
Yeah.
When you mean the IGBC website, right?
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify. Under,
yep, yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Yep, thank you. Yep, it'll be on the IGBC website under the NCDE subcommittee page, and I can show folks that website tomorrow as well too, as we kind of navigate things. Any other questions out there? Please raise your hand if you have a comment or question. Randy, I'll just pause here until you want to take it away.
I think just taking a quick look at the agenda again, if it works for you guys, I'll see if we get any frowny faces, but why don't we go ahead and break for lunch right now with a plan to add a little time to our lunch and come back at the previously scheduled time of 12:30. And we'll be on regular schedule starting at 12:30 with the agency and tribal roundtable updates. And then we will provide another opportunity for public comment after those updates before we adjourn for today. If that works for everybody, we'll see you back here at 12:30.
And for anybody out there looking for the new agenda, it is posted on the IGBC website under meetings. And if you click on the NCDE meeting, the new agenda is then there. I will post this in the chat as well for folks to get the link to where to find that new agenda.
it would be of interest maybe at the winter meeting to have this as an agenda item, because there's a lot of pieces and parts to it that I won't be able to cover. So think about that as I'm going through some of just the basics here. So the Highway 93 biological opinion, in 2017, Federal Highways and MDT, they reinitiated the Section 7 consultation on the highway, that 93 corridor. It went from Evero to Polson because there had recently been a lot of Grizzly vehicle collisions, and the incidental take statement was exceeded. So the service, Mike McGrath, finished that last year. Again, the whole biological opinions, it covers that entire corridor, Evero to Polson. So the opinion revises that incidental take statement. He looked at recent trends in the collisions, increasing traffic on the highway, bear crossing data. FWP put together a great report, worked with the tribe, and compiled all the data about what we know with collar bears and crossings, and used all those things to come up with a new incidental take statement for that same corridor. And so what the opinion says is that an average of 4 bears per year could be taken over a 6-year moving average. And of those, up to 2 could be females. So that means over the 6 years, up to 24 bear mortalities are allowed under this opinion. The opinion, it has more than just the incidental take statement. It went into detail to update some baseline conditions. It had been a while since the last one, and so there's things about the road reconstructions that have happened since then. So it updated that, some of the crossing structures that have been built since the last consultation. And he did also look into research about what we know about how bears use crossings, including the ones that are in existence, but also from other areas. Let's see, so the analysis of the opinion, it looked at the proposed action, which was based on the SEIS. And so that included major road reconstruction, putting in new crossings, particularly between Post Creek and Ronan North, along with fencing, a fencing project between St. Ignatius and Lemery Road, which is just north of Post Creek, to help guide bears to use those structures. You know, the opinion noted that SEIS, those structures might not be as adequate as we'd like, you know, knowing that grizzlies or females like to use over crossings rather than under crossings. So some terms and conditions were that the Federal Highways and MDT they need to consult with the biologists from the CSKT and the service kind of on an iterative basis to look at the design of the fencing project between St. Ignatius and Post Creek and the project in general. And so that fencing project is going on right now. They're in the design, finalizing the design stage, and that's supposed to be completed, I think, November 30th of 2022. I can tell you, I was out there on the ground. They've done a really nice job of involving agencies looking and walking along the highway to look at, you know, what's the fence going to look like. And so I think that will continue. And yeah, continue looking at the design as they go along. So those are the kind of highlights of the project. And like I said, if there's a desire to know more about this, it's a pretty hefty report. Maybe we could talk about having an agenda item for the fall where Mike would be there, and maybe Mike and Joe could tag team it, talking about the project a bit more. I think that would be helpful. So Randy, that's my update.
Okay, thanks, Hillary. Any questions for Hillary?
No questions, Randy. I'll just I'll touch on the fence project a little bit more when you get to me.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Yeah, and Hillary, to your point on maybe having that as an agenda item, I know there's a lot of interest in that section of the road, and hearing the updates, at least what I saw from some of the transportation groups when they were meeting, just to see the visuals and the pictures, even just to get a better understanding of what the issues are, is super helpful for understanding what's challenging about that site and those sites. So yeah, it's a great idea. All right, thanks, Hillary. Let's go next to Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. I want to see what Ken has before I provide some updates. Ken, did you have anything from your end? If you're still with us?
Yeah, actually, Randy, no, I don't. Most of what I had was covered in the legislative update. You know, I guess the one thing I would say is mainly for Fish and Wildlife Service is a lot of that legislation I talked about was because of skepticism about delisting and, you know, whether it's ever going to happen, and there's not a lot of confidence it will. And I think about, you know, the role, or one of the charges of this committee is recovery of bears. So I think at some point it'd be good to have a talk about, you know, where we see now that we have this recovered population of you know, what are next steps. And I hear Hillary saying there's, you know, we've got a new administration and stuff, but that lack of direction is part of what's leading to some of this legislative response you're seeing now. So that's all I have.
Thanks, Ken. Jody, I see you popped on. Did you have something to add there?
Yeah, I guess, can you hear me? Okay. I guess the only thing I would add to Hillary's and to respond back to Ken is to say, you know, we have a court case that we lost for Yellowstone, and that court case identified several things that we needed to do before we could move forward with delisting. We haven't made much success in addressing those issues. So I understand, you know, that we'd like the new administration to give us direction on moving forward, but we have some responsibility locally as partners to address those issues that were brought up by the courts. And I think that, as Ken said, as the committee, as one of the subcommittees, but also as the larger committee, we have some responsibility to conservation of bear, and I think we have a role there.
Yeah, thanks, Jody. And maybe if we could, tomorrow when we're talking about the NCDE work plan and our priorities, maybe that'd be an opportunity to highlight those elements that the court brought forward. If that's work that we can be doing in the NCDE, it'd be really great to highlight or continue to highlight those things that we can be focused on, because I don't know that there's anybody attempting to drag their feet or missing an opportunity here. Some of the challenge for us, I think, is just understanding what is it that we should be working on. So yeah, I think that'd be a great addition tomorrow. Yep, thanks, Ken. So from other Fish, Wildlife, and Parks ends, interestingly, Ken also covered some of my highlights. I wanted to mention that I heard from the Eastern Front that we're fully staffed over there. This morning in introductions, you saw Wesley Sarmento and Chad White. And I know that they both have their technicians hired on, Daniel McHugh and Jack Austin. And so they're fully staffed on the Eastern Front from Fish, Wildlife, and Parks end of things, and pretty happy to be. And then also having heard from Ken the other day, we're moving forward in preparation anyway for the likelihood of having the resources to hire a specialist or a technician for the Bitterroot. And so we've been coordinating with Jamie Jonkel and folks to prepare for that possibility and get moving on that, which is much needed for us in preparation for that expanding grizzly bear population, as well as on the ground issues that are happening now with food storage and complications with black bears. So very interested in those two things. And then also, as Ken identified in the legislative piece, we have some work, some next items in identifying relocation sites that need to go to our Fish and Wildlife Commission. So for those of you in the NCDE, you've probably been following Jamie Jonkel and other specialists starting to coordinate on that effort. So we'll need some help as we move forward on that. And I know that the different specialists in your areas are working with the federal land managers and partners to start getting that list of previously identified sites and identifying a process for internally working through what we would want to propose to the Fish and Wildlife Commission. So I'm seeing the emails on that now. Partners are seeing that effort ramp up a little bit. I'm not seeing that as being too challenging, as we will be identifying a lot of existing sites. And it's a chance for us to refresh that and recognize that things might have changed since those were approved sites from some of those from a long time ago. And then I wanted to pause just long enough to see if Jim Williams had any updates from Region 1 from Fish, Wildlife, and Parks before we move to the next folks.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. Yeah, no, I just would, and you probably already talked about it because I was late to the meeting today, that bears are rolling down the mountain. I mean, Tim Manley's moving a bear today. The demand with the new residents that have shown up here, the valley probably grew 30% last year with all of the new migrants that have come from the coasts and from Texas and Seattle and California and beyond. There's a 3-year churn typically, in these mountain resort valleys. And it seems that we're poised to be overwhelmed when it comes to an I&E, how to live with bears point of view. So the bears are coming down the hills. We got a whole bunch of new residents up here. We're going to be really busy this summer. It's totally different than the Blackfoot or the East Front over here. We have, this is a resort amenity, a resort valley. They're living here to play, and they don't have a clue about garbage. So it started. It's going to be a crazy summer as soon as school gets out. There are no rental cars available in the Flathead Valley until October. There are 75,000 new flights here. We are going to get slammed. So it's going to be a crazy bear people year for the crew for sure. So I just throw that out there.
Yeah, that's a nice reminder, Jim. And I know the updates that we got last fall from Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and our federal land managers who were addressing dispersed camping and education on leave no trace, which I think Jeff Mao had mentioned wasn't a leave no trace 1.5 or 2.0, but a 0.5, backing up and getting back to the basics of communicating with new recreationists, their responsibilities when they're in the out of doors. So yeah, very much readying ourselves for a huge increase in recreation. So I'm going to call on USGS. I think Claudia's out, and maybe Tabitha, are you going to take the lead there?
Yeah, that's correct. Hi, everybody. Tabitha back again with from USGS. And I just had a few different things I wanted to share for us. The paper that I had mentioned at the last meeting that was going to be shortly out did come out just after that meeting on, it was titled The Smell of Success, Reproductive Success Related to Rub Behavior in Brown Bears, not brown hares. And basically in that paper, we found that bears that rubbed on rub objects such as trees had more mates and also had more offspring, and that was true for both male and female bears. And basically that just supported the thinking and hypotheses that rubbing is an important way to communicate among potential mates or competitors for bears. I will paste the link to that and also to the other things I talk about into the chat so everybody can access that if they haven't already seen that. The second piece I wanted to report on is it's actually from the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, but Frank Van Manen and others, GBST team, have a recent report that's out on their improved approach with estimating numbers of bears. It's less negatively biased than the Chow 2 approach that they were using previously. So that's, I'll put a link to that also. And then just a quick list of the things that we're working on now. I'm working on a paper where we're kind of still in the analysis stage, assessing influences on changes of density in Glacier National Park over time, using our long-term genetic data set. We also have a paper that we're working on that's looking at black bear density and connectivity in and near Glacier Park. That's in collaboration with a PhD student at Colorado State University, Sarah Carroll. And then we also have a paper that we're working on that is about using citizen science data to look at huckleberry phenology and distribution. That paper will compare counts and classifications of trained technicians versus citizen scientists and highlight some of the lessons we learned from that process. We are continuing to collaborate with the Glacier National Park Citizen Science Program to collect data on huckleberry presence and phenology in and near the park. And I will paste the link in terms of who you can email to get more information to that after I'm done talking to. So I think that was it. Those are the main things. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Tabitha. Any questions or comments for USGS? All right, so let's go to BLM with Katie Stevens. And apologies to Katie, I keep missing her on some communications and didn't have her on the agenda, so I told her she can start taking it personally. But don't take it personally, Katie. Did you want to go next?
Yeah, I can. I'm outside. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. So I just had a couple things that were relevant. They're not necessarily Grizzly specific, but wanted to just mention that we recently replaced our longtime wildlife biologist, Jim Sparks, who was very involved in grizzly bear issues in the Missoula field office, and his replacement is on board. Her name is Ann Orlando, and we're really looking forward to getting her engaged with all the different working groups and everything. The other thing I wanted to mention is we've been making great progress in partnership with the Nature Conservancy with those acquisitions of new public land in Belmont Gold, and we also have some planning out right now in 9 Mile Woodchuck area. So added a pretty fair amount of, I think, quality grizzly habitat to sort of permanent public stewardship. So we're just continuing to chunk away on that, and I just wanted to highlight that and bring it up because it's a ton of good work by staff, and I think makes a difference for grizzly conservation in the area too. That's it for me. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Katie. And thanks for those updates and a reminder about those properties changing hands in the Blackfoot and all the partnership that went into those, and a very long vision from the Nature Conservancy and holding those previous Plum Creek grounds and trying to move those into public ownership and doing a really good job. Hats off to Nature Conservancy for working very hard with partners to maintain and improve and enable those properties to be more easily transitioned into federal ownership. They're working really hard to make sure that they're easy to receive. So let's see. How about National Park Service?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can, John.
Yep, so I don't have a whole lot to report out since last November. I guess I'll just mention that we are, as Jim Williams commented on, we're expecting a huge influx of visitors this summer. It sounds like tourist Armageddon from the way things are shaping up. So in that vein, we've been sort of preparing on the grizzly front to deal with conflicts. We've been working on updating our MOU with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks to respond to human wildlife conflicts. We're looking for avenues to continue our connectivity work, kind of following on what Kylie and Joe talked about. We've been doing sort of targeted connectivity research along the Middle Fork corridor, and we're continuing to look at opportunities to sort of keep ticking the boxes off on the needs there. And I guess lastly, we did accept a subadult female bear from FWP. Wesley and Jack came over yesterday and we took it up the North Fork and let it go. It's a young bear from a livestock conflict. So I guess spring is sprung. That's all I got, Randy.
Great, thanks, John. Any questions for John or National Park Service questions? So I got to be careful not to put you on the spot, Paul, from Alberta. I didn't have you on the list either. And I want to offer, if you're still plugged in, on whether or not you had some updates that you'd like to share. And I can go to somebody next if you need a second.
Hi. No, thanks, Randy. Yeah, so what I can share, I guess, just off the top of my head quickly. So we have engaged with a contract report writer to do a new status report for grizzly bears in Alberta, which will then go to our Endangered Species Conservation Committee, who will make a status recommendation to our Minister of Environment. Currently, grizzly bears in Alberta are listed as threatened, and we've seen population growth over the last 10 plus years. So we thought it made sense to do another status assessment. So that's in process. The Foothills Research Institute, FRI Research, where Gord Stenhouse has done grizzly bear work for the last 23 years. That grizzly bear research program shut down at the end of March. Gord was on secondment from the department, and that secondment ended. So that program ended with Gord coming back to the department. His future is still unknown at this point. We've got a position for him. It's just a matter of whether or not he's going to retire. So hopefully he'll stick around and help us develop an ongoing monitoring program. But we'll see. That is still outstanding. But before Gord finished, we prepared a manuscript which is currently in review that looks at movement behavior of translocated bears in Alberta. I think we only had 12 animals over the course of a couple of years, but we compared it to resident bears and just kind of looked at movement patterns, movement behaviors, how it differs and what to expect. The reason I guess I bring that up is hopefully it'll be out, or we could share the manuscript because it may be relevant for the discussions about approved release sites and that kind of thing. We found one of kind of the key findings that that the analysis showed was that the habitat that we released the bears in was really didn't really influence whether or not they successfully integrated into the population, because, and as all you managers down there know, you move a bear and it wanders quite a bit. So developing tolerance for a bear that's exploring and trying to find a new place to live is kind of one of the key takeaways there. Anyway, so that should be out hopefully in the next little while. We may be able to share manuscript with some of you guys that are looking at assigning release sites if that's of interest to you. Yeah, we haven't had many conflict bears yet this year. We had one, or many bear conflicts. We had one, a couple in Waterton Park where a bear scared some people, and then a shed hunter down along the St. Mary's River ran into a mom with 3 cubs, and she knocked him down and bit his arm, but then his black lab chased her off, and luckily she didn't bite very hard, so there was no real damage. But that was probably one of your Montana bears, so hopefully he went home after that. Anyway, yeah, that's about it. Hope I didn't ramble too much there, but thanks for the opportunity, Randy.
Oh, gold star, Paul, for catching you off guard like that. Thank you very much for the update. Appreciate it.
For sure.
Let's go to Forest Service, and if there's trying to think of the best way to work through that. I know if we can, I'll start with maybe Sarah, who's sitting in place for Bill Avey.
Hi, everybody. Not a whole lot of changes, I think, between the last meeting. We assume we're going to be signing our new forest plan here soon, but we have some internal process, including briefings with the administration, the secretary's office, that need to take place. So I'm not sure if that's going to be 2 months or 3 months. That forest plan does carry forward all the grizzly bear amendments that were part of the Flathead. So that's included in it. And then the only other news we really have is that we have filled the Lincoln District Ranger position with Rob Gump, who was formerly on the Bitterroot National Forest, though he's coming to us from Florida. So that's really the update we have from the Helen, Lewis and Clark.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Let maybe jump over to the Lolo. I think Greg Costina is sitting in for Carolyn Upton. Greg, did you have an update from the Lolo?
Yeah, I have just a few items. Thanks, Randy. The first thing I did want to mention is we do have a new forest biologist, and that's Chad Bell. He's coming from the Southeast US, but he spent a lot of his career over on the West Coast. So he'll be diving into the bear issues and working with a lot of the folks on this call. We'll be assisting the Fish and Wildlife Service on Jennifer's survey this summer. Our bios have been helping out identifying locations, and we should have some of our temp seasonal should be able to help with that project. We will be re-engaging on the relocation discussions. I think we met a couple of years ago, and there was some interest in having the Lolo and some other forests come up with a plan. And we don't have one right now for relocation of bears on the forest, but it seems like an appropriate time. But the legislation that was mentioned earlier in this meeting did make me wonder quite a bit about what the process is going to be for coordinating with the commission. And I assume that will be coming in, since the legislation just happened, that'll be coming later. We are working on a programmatic consultation for the forest. Almost all of our forests now is bears likely to be present, or I forget the designation, but anyways, we have to consult across the forest. And so we're trying to add those areas that weren't previously consulted on in some of our other amendments to our plan. I know Sealy Lake has been working with Jamie and Fish, Wildlife and Parks to try to get ahead of some of the bear issues that happened last year on the Sealy Lake facility, the ranger station there. So hopefully that's going okay. And I was just going to point out on recreation, I just received something this is nationally for the Forest Service, but as some other folks have said, we saw during COVID, I think a lot of the supervisors said last year in the fall that, use has gone way up. We've seen a lot of increased use. And what's interesting from the national data is, that use is not in campground areas or things like that. It's kind of the dispersed areas, which is definitely something to consider for the grizzly bear groups, because that's where we expect grizzly bears to be, is some of those dispersed areas. So that's kind of an interesting thing. This is national data, so I don't know what that means for Region 1 specifically. And hopefully we'll get a breakdown of that sometime in the future. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thanks, Greg. So let's jump to Flathead National Forest. Will, were you going to present for Flathead?
Yeah, I am. Thanks. Just a couple of quick things is we wanted to pass on thanks to the IGBC for their funding into our I&E program. And as everybody's alluded to, that's going to become more and more critical. And also just real quickly is our forest biologist, Amy Jacobs, had worked hand in hand with the folks there, and we have a updated relocation document for U.S. Forest Service lands on the Flathead there. And I'm going to leave it at that.
Great. Thanks, Will. And I saw for a second, Craig, you had your hand up. I was going to next go to one more Forest Service, but wanted to see if you had a question.
Nope, that was a button mishap.
Okay, thanks. If that's the only button mishap for today, we're doing great. And I think I had, was it Jeremy and Jeremy Anderson? Is that right?
Yep, that's right. So I just had a few quick updates. Will mentioned the update to the grizzly bear relocation plan, and the Kootenai is also included in that plan. And we added a couple sites this year, and that was finalized April 7th, I believe. And then I had a few personnel updates. We're gonna again have our bear ranger technician position for the Rexford and Fort Pine Ranger District based out of Eureka, and doing information education. That district covers the bulk of our NCDE portion on the Kootenai, and then also has some ground in the Cadmiac, and that bear ranger covers both ecosystems. And we've got two key folks retiring tomorrow. I indicated in the introduction this morning that Brian Donner, our district ranger up there in Eureka, is retiring. And he's been our rep on this subcommittee the last several years. And then we're also losing Lynn Johnson, our wildlife biologist up there in Eureka. She's retiring tomorrow. She's done a lot of good work over the years for grizzly bears, especially the NCD portion of the Kootenai. And we don't know who's going to be filling the wildlife biologist position permanently yet. We're still working through that process to fill that. But we do know that the new district ranger is going to be Seth Carbonari, who should be starting his position June 7th, I believe. So we'll have a new rep on this subcommittee. And that's all I had.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. And we're going to miss Brian. He was great having him on the subcommittee, and thanks for joining us today for those updates. Hey, Scott, your hand's up. Do you have a question?
No, but I did have a brief update to offer from the regional office of Forest Service, just letting folks know. Probably a lot of folks have already know this, but Forest Service did fill in behind the IGBC executive coordinator position. It's been vacant for the last almost year and a half since Ellen Davis retired. So David Diamond will be coming into that position starting June 7th. People may know David already from the facilitation work he's done with IGBC and with the Grizzly Bear Advisory Council. He did those while he was also working as the Greater Yellowstone Coordinating Committee's executive coordinator. But anyhow, lots of great applicants put in for that job, and it was we're real happy that that David will be coming in and starting here in another 6 weeks or so.
Great, thanks, Scott. And that'll, I think, maybe if we have a minute, we can talk a little bit about that tomorrow when we talk about the work plan stuff, the role of that executive coordinator along with IGBC and some of that conversation. I think it's just helpful to frame that up. So it's a good addition, Scott. Thank you.
Yep.
Let's go to Dale Becker with CSKT.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to be filling in for Dale this afternoon. We're over here on the Flathead Indian Reservation. Last year, we had a relatively low conflict year. We didn't have any reported livestock depredations, though we did have a few grain and other livestock food associated conflicts. We did have 2 non-target captures of grizzly bears that we then released. And then we also received a subadult female from the Blackfeet Reservation early in the summer last year. We continued to monitor 2 collared females last year, both with cubs, and we monitored them both through the summer and the fall. We received a tribal wildlife grant in order to study grizzly bear use of the Highway 93 corridor. So that is going to include a combination of photo monitoring of the existing wildlife crossing structures along that route, as well as a literature review, crossing structure evaluation, and working or looking at highway mortalities where bears are being hit on the highway, and then comparing that to GPS collar locations of where we have grizzly bears crossing the highway corridor as well. Another thing that was new last year, so in the past, we have had a bit of confusion here on the reservation on who to contact or call to report bear as well as other, carnivore conflicts. And so one thing that we launched last year was a new 24/7 wildlife conflict call line. And so hopefully that is going to prove to reduce some of that confusion so that there's one number for all people to call to report a conflict. And so hopefully that will help streamline some of that communication in responding to those calls. We also last year continued with our Kodiak bear resistant garbage can loaner program. And if you haven't heard of that, what that is, the last few years, we will purchase some of up to 65-gallon resistant cans or bear resistant Kodiak cans. And then for those residents of the reservation that self-haul their own garbage, they can loan a can from us and use that to help reduce some of those conflicts with bears, both grizzly and black, but focusing mainly in grizzly bear habitat areas to reduce some of that conflict. And then on that note, similarly, we have been working with Defenders of Wildlife and the Fish and Wildlife Service to provide bear spray distribution programs. So what that is when we have residents of the Flathead Indian Reservation, non-members coming in to purchase recreation permits or fishing licenses, bird licenses, anything like that, they have the opportunity to purchase bear spray, a can of bear spray for only $10. And so the thought and hope behind that is to just get as many cans of bear spray out on the landscape as possible to reduce or to increase safety and kind of to reduce some of those encounters. And then for our tribal membership, since they're not purchasing those recreation permits, but if they bring in a tribal ID, they're able to have access to that same opportunity as well. And so for my side, that kind of sums it up. And then Whisper was going to chat, or nope, that was me, I covered it. So yep, that's what we've got over here. Thanks, Randy.
Thank you, Carrie. That great detail. Thanks for the update. Let's see. I don't think, and I'll pause for just a second. I don't think we have anybody from the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. I've got a placeholder here, but didn't see anybody. Just gonna look at the list here again.
Randy, I believe Jeff Horn was going to speak, but he, I think, was going to only be available tomorrow.
Okay, thanks. Maybe we'll have a little bit of an opportunity to hear from Jeff tomorrow. Let's go to Wildlife Services with Craig Glazier.
Thanks, Randy. Hello, everybody. Wildlife Services is fully staffed. We had some updates on personnel. Mike Hogan retired out of Conrad Valier area, who works for Rocky Mountain Front. We filled his position with Skippy Sims, who was a part-time assistant along the Rocky Mountain Front. So that's working out really well. We hired for that part-time position, Luke Peebles, who is a resident. He grew up there in Shoto. So that's a good fit to help out. We also were able to hire back Diamond Running Crane on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation, who works with our wildlife specialist there, Glenn Hall. Diamond does a majority of the fencing projects, a lot of electric fence for producers and 4-H kids over there. And that's a cost share program with producers. Also able to continue the Range Rider program over there in Eureka on the Kootenai. That'll be a new employee this year. So that project's gone on 4 or 5 years now. We've received a mix of funding. Got a lot of federal funding for some of these project type work, the non-lethal stuff. And then it's also a mix of partner funding, a lot of partner funding there, including producers. So anyhow, that's kind of the gist on staffing. It's definitely spring already. livestock conflicts. I think out of 5 specialists, we're approaching, if not 25, maybe closer to 30 conflicts that we've responded to and had to do investigations, trapping, and I'd say 75% of those, we've only captured 2 bears. It's pretty interesting. Not a lot of return visitors in the spring. They seem to eat and then leave. So I guess they're still sleepy. But anyhow, and then the majority of those, I'm sure Jeff Horn from the Blackfeet will talk about this, but the majority of those are coming from Glacier County, from the Blackfeet Indian Reservation by far. So anyhow, that's pretty much the quick and dirty of it. Any questions, I'll answer.
Great, thanks, Craig. Any questions for Craig? It's nice to hear you're fully staffed. George.
Well, George from the Livestock Law Board again, and don't have a whole lot to expand upon their earlier talk on legislation. We will probably be revamping our grant application slightly, so I'm not encouraging people to apply quite yet. Our focus is really going to probably change to more of rancher based. We're trying to get individual ranchers to become more involved, to apply for the grants, and that rather than through some of the organizations, because many of the ranchers have told me they're not really willing to go through an NGO. So I believe we'll probably be putting out some newspaper ads and that, and announcing on our Facebook page when we are accepting grant applications. Our federal grant money that we get is restricted to wolves only, although many of those projects actually overlap and are dual purpose with grizzly bears. This year, rather than having the application process that I go through in September, it didn't close until March, and they're just now starting to review those grant applications. So I don't know when we'll receive any federal money. That's why it was such a blessing to get the state money, which we can dedicate to grizzlies and wolves. But again, as I said earlier this morning, even that money won't be available out until after July 1st. So once somebody does want to apply for a grant, we do have our grant application out on our website, llb.mt.gov, and we will be encouraging people to apply once we're ready. As far as claims go, as Craig alluded to, I'm aware of quite a bit of activity in Glacier County. One of my new board members, Joe Kipp, lives just out of Browning and has contacted me frequently about the problems they're already having this spring. And it sounds like it's a rough start for Glacier County. Other than that, I don't have anything else new.
George, quick question for you, and I'm not as familiar with the grant application process, but if there are landowners or groups that traditionally have worked with NGOs, would you have a suggestion then for the NGOs to kind of encourage or press that back towards the individual ranchers to apply?
Not really, because there's a very high reluctance of a lot of them working with NGOs because they feel that they're pushing to help keep the grizzly bears on the landscape while the ranchers are suffering the other side of it. So there's a perception there that working with an NGO is kind of like working with the enemy.
So
I don't have a solution.
Okay. If there's a producer that does have a relationship or works with an NGO, or if there's a grant application process, would you suggest then that the rancher just take the lead on that?
I would. That would probably be preferable to the majority of my board. However, I'm not going to discourage any NGO from going forward because some of them are doing great work too.
Okay. I'm sure we'll learn more as that process unfolds, and I'm sure folks that are much more tied to that will be in touch and learn on the run.
Yep.
Great, thanks, George. And let's go to Department of Transportation with Joe Wiegand.
All right, and I even have my camera working now. Well, I just thought I'd provide a quick update. MDT, as I've mentioned before, does camera monitoring on our new projects that have included the installation of underpasses and crossing structures. And just a couple of quick updates. The structures under Montana 200 east of Lincoln, those are still seeing relatively frequent use by grizzly bears. Really good use by all species, you know, in that area, but good use by grizzly bears, wolves, mountain lion, black bear, and then certainly plenty of white-tailed deer and elk. I asked Paul Sturm, the Great Falls District biologist, this morning about the new structures near Kiowa, because I know he had mentioned that he had caught some bears on camera near those structures. Turns out the bears near those structures have just been paralleling the highway. They did not cross using the structures yet. And then I've also mentioned a number of times the Montana 200 project up near Thompson Falls. The new Thompson River Bridge has seen a lot of use by black bear and mountain lion. Certainly by far, you know, the greatest use is whitetails, elk, and bighorn sheep. But no grizzly bears yet under the Thompson River Bridge. And then pretty much the same story with the new underpass, wildlife underpass that was built under Montana 200, just east of Dykstra's field there. That was built primarily for bighorn sheep, and bighorns are using it, whitetails, elk. Thought the structure might be a little on the small side for elk, but they're starting to use it now, and turkeys are also really enjoying use of that structure. We talked a little bit with, well, for a while with Kylie this morning, and, you know, I just wanted to mention that, you know, for MDT district biologists, you know, participation in working groups, you know, like the Missoula Regional Connectivity Group have been becoming more and more a regular and frequent role that MDT biologists are in. In you know, just the Missoula Kalispell areas, I've been involved with the Missoula Regional Group, the Bitterroot Sapphire Corridor Coalition, and then also the US2 group that John Waller and Tabitha Graves have been taking the lead on, and have done a great job getting things done with that group. It's a pleasure to be involved with these groups, but they're really starting to catch on statewide. I know there's a very active group in the Paradise Valley. So the smaller projects, you know, that might give us some framework on how to better collaborate on these, you know, like what the Missoula Regional Group is working on. I think they're really going to benefit everybody in the long run. I want to touch real briefly on the research project. I think I've mentioned that one previously. Western Transportation Institute is working on an MDT funded project along Montana 200 and US 93 North. It's primarily trying to look at how to address the challenge with the fact that pod animals, you know, wolves, bears, mountain lions, are able to walk across cattle guards. And we don't really have a good, effective fix to that, especially not an expensive one. You know, we do have the wildlife or the electrified deterrent mats, you know, whether it's asphalt, you know, electric components embedded in asphalt or concrete. Those are very pricey structures, and it's really hard to get them on the ground with projects. So this research is looking at, how there might be some other ways of modifying existing cattle guards and wildlife guards with rubberized and electrified mats that lay across the cattle guard. So the Western Transportation Institute will be doing some camera monitoring of some of those experimental features. And then also another really interesting one is the use of electrified bump gates, a gate that has electrified strands of wire hanging down from it. And those could be used over cattle guards as well. And then vehicles are just able to drive through them. So there's a couple of things on that project. And then also another component of that is looking at better jump out heights. When wildlife exclusion fence is built, we try to provide wildlife with a means to escape the right of way. And so we have these jump out escape ramps for wildlife to use. And Western Transportation Institute's previous research on US 93 showed that very few deer, elk, mule deer, were actually using those jump outs if they got within the right of way. We really need the animals to be able to leave the right of way if they get trapped inside. So the research is also looking at getting some of those jump outs lowered and looking at what a more ideal height might be for some of those jump outs. Some of them were constructed higher than what they were specified. Some of them were 8.5 or more feet high. They were specified to be 6.5, and so some of them started off too high to begin with. And then in the last few weeks, the researcher and MDT maintenance have gone out and started lowering some of those jump outs to start monitoring for the next couple of years. And then the fence project that Hillary mentioned, US 93 North, north and south of St. Ignatius. That project is in the design phase. We met with Fish and Wildlife Service, CSKT, MDT maintenance, and others in the field back in maybe January, and pretty much brainstormed how to best address some challenges associated with constructing fence along that stretch. It's easy enough to go in and install an 8-foot fence. It doesn't take a lot of design, or engineering to get that done. But the challenge is the number of driveway approaches, county road intersections that we have to deal with. And, given the challenge with cattle guards, how do we address bears being able to walk in the right of way after we've built 5 miles of fence? So, we're looking at different options. Right now, cattle guard is our best bet for getting the project on the ground quickly within the next 2 years. There are some existing cattle guards at driveways that we're going to add an additional cattle guard to. The nice thing is we realized in the field is some of those cattle guards lead right into people's driveways and their fenced yard areas. Some of those yards have just an agricultural type fence around them. Some of them are wood fenced, but it does provide an enclosed area that the bears would have to get into in order to access the right of way. So we're hoping that maybe that would be a deterrent. But if it turns out we build it and bears are getting in, then we would do adaptive management and jump on modifying those locations to make sure the bears aren't getting in. Another piece of that we discussed in the field was we've got several county roads that run perpendicular to to 93 that we would extend 8-foot exclusion fence down those county roads for 100 feet, a couple hundred feet, and then pair that with a cattle guard so that for a bear to get inside the right of way, they would have to not only cross a cattle guard, but then they would have a fence tunnel essentially that they'd have to travel down to get in the 93 right away. So we're hoping, you know, the presence of the structure, the fence, you know, going down those county roads could be an additional deterrent. But again, if it doesn't work, we'll have to look at adaptive management. I think that's pretty much what I've got for now. There's a lot of things going on. You know, it's in the smaller group discussions. I bring up that, you know, there's a lot going on in MDT. You know, we probably look at somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 or more projects statewide on an annual basis. And I think it works out to about 125 actual highway projects that I look at for the Missoula and Kalispell areas on an annual basis. And that provides me a lot of opportunity to be thinking ahead and looking for opportunities, seeing what the wildlife vehicle collision data looks like, what the carcass pickup data, you know, when our MDT maintenance staff they're picking up carcasses and recording those locations. I mean, with 125 projects a year, that gives me a lot of opportunities to see what there might be for problem areas and how we might be able to get a head start on addressing some of those problems. So, but a lot of it focuses on deer again. I mean, that when you start looking at carcasses, we're mostly talking white-tailed deer on an entirely statewide basis.
Great, thanks, Joe. I see a question from Tabitha. Joe, should I read that, Tabitha, or you just want to ask it here?
Oh, I can just ask. Joe, I was just wondering on Highway 89 up on the Blackfeet Reservation where that reconstruction happened, is there camera monitoring of those new bridges?
Yeah, that was the Kiowa area bridges that I mentioned. Yeah,
Okay.
Paul Sturm is monitoring those, and he's documented a few bears paralleling the highway, but they haven't used the structures yet.
Oh, okay, great. I misheard you. I thought you said Kyla. Thanks.
And Cecily?
Hey, Joe. So I was just wondering, it's my understanding, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, that the Highway 93 project has a second phase that's going to go north of what has currently been constructed. And I was just wondering what the time frame is on that and what we can do to kind of maybe start planning for that.
Yeah, currently the fence project is one phase. It's about 2.5 miles north of St. Ignatius, about the same distance south of St. Ignatius going to Pistol Creek. So we're looking at that entire 5+ mile stretch through there, you know, with the exception of the town of St. Ignatius. You might be thinking of the Post Creek Hill project. That project, as Dale and Whisper can attest, because they've been involved in a lot of these conversations, that project has been moving along at a snail's pace. It took us a long time to simply work through wetland and stream mitigation issues because it is in a very wet area. Trying to do some stream and wetland enhancement while we're at it. That particular stretch is, we're struggling with the actual bridge itself. The SEIS proposed a 500-foot long bridge, and our hydraulics studies and geologic studies have revealed that it's going to be very hard to build a bridge that will stand up in a seismic event. or even stay on top of the ground just because of the high water table. So we're running into primarily engineering issues with the bridge. We've gone through a value analysis study that Dale and Whisper have also been involved with, where we looked at the 500-foot bridge versus a 300-foot versus 200. All of those options come with unique challenges. Basically, the project lead for MDT has initiated a study with Federal Highways Administration, and we're going to continue plugging away at it, trying to see how we might be able to get that project built sooner than later. Because, you know, right now it's a 50-foot bridge, and the primary thing keeping the animals off the road is guardrail. You know, there is no fence tied into the bridge to funnel wildlife. Not that they have anywhere to go other than you know, the stream once they reach the bridge. Yeah, 200 feet would be a great improvement, especially with wildlife fencing. 300 would be even better. 500, no doubt, would be phenomenal for that highly used bear corridor. But it's, you know, in 6 years that I've been working on it, we're not much further ahead than where we were 6 years ago, primarily due to the hydrologic and geologic engineering constraints.
And I'm guessing that maybe cost is a factor. I'm just wondering if this is a project that we maybe try to target getting some public input and fundraising to help support.
You know, Dale and Whisper can chime in, but you know, if we were to pursue something like that, I would probably look more towards Crow Creek. We've lost several bears just on the south side of the Crow Creek location, and that would be one. I mean, that one's in the far distant future planning.
Okay.
But MDT, you know, Missoula District Administrator that we previously had actually considered maybe breaking out a small stretch of highway there and replacing the Crow Creek structure with a crossing structure and associated fence. That one, you know, it's hard to jump that far in the future and predict things because, again, we could always end up with the same hydrology issues, high groundwater, seismic issues. It's hard to know for certain, but that one would be a smaller bite for us to try to take on and look at a breakout project that maybe is constructible in 5 years or 10 years, and instead of battling a long-term issue, you know, like what we're facing with Post Creek.
Okay.
It's a thought.
But the project north is kind of going incrementally. It's not like a big, you know, let's do 10 miles of road all at the same time.
Correct. Yeah, but basically, you know, for MDT, we look at it, the Post Creek stretch, which extends from, you know, just north of St. Ignatius, where we're talking about ending the existing fence, or actually, no, that one starts at real close to Hunt's Timber there, and then extends north towards Nine Pipes, but it ends short of Nine Pipes, and then the Nine Pipes segment is the last segment, and that Crow Creek is part of that. And you know, that one, I mean, we're in the middle of a huge wetland complex through the Nine Pipes area, so we've got plenty of challenges to try to do more work in that area, whether it's just strictly the road and bridge engineering, or if we want to try to get wildlife crossing structures under or over the highway through that area. We certainly have plenty of work, you know, ahead of us.
Yeah. Okay, I was just trying to determine if we wanted to get, some, public-private partnerships trying to help with that stretch.
Yeah, I think people would become quickly frustrated if we tried to do that with the Post Creek stretch.
Okay.
Working on it from, my chair, is frustrating. And I understand why it's taking so long. Bringing somebody in from the outside that would like to see something done now or the next few years, they're going to get frustrated with something like the Post Creek stretch really fast.
Okay.
And I wouldn't want to lose that energy. If we were to get momentum on a project, I would not want the first project to end up derailing people and making them frustrated and throwing their hands up in the air. That's certainly not what we want to do.
Okay. Good advice. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Cecily. And might have had a question from Hillary. Not sure if you still have something.
Well, I was going to ask a question, but I realized we're past the agenda time. Maybe I'll just mention it for people. Well, I wasn't even sure to bring it up. Joe, you and I've talked about this a lot, and I'm just wondering, this may be silly because this is MDT, you're all about safety, in terms of human safety. But I just thought, there are so many collisions involving, deaths, fatalities on that stretch. Is there anything else we could be doing to push it from that realm? Or is that already, you already take all that into consideration?
Yeah, that's already worked in there. And as an example of breaking something out because a priority need is identified, we've got a little project that's been proposed right at the Nine Pipes Lodge, because we've got left turn issues where people are either merging onto the highway or exiting the highway. We've got an intersection there, we've got the lodge, and there's a collision issue there right at the lodge. So a small project has been broken out to add some left turn lanes or additional signals and lighting to alert motorists of merging traffic or turning traffic. So that's a small piece of the much larger Nine Pipe segment. And I think if we want to look at, again, it takes me back to like the Crow Creek idea is, if we have a grizzly bear collision hotspot and we can break out a segment that benefits grizzly bears, motorists, from the safety aspect, let's look at trying to take smaller bites. I really don't want to, just like I was saying to Cecily, I don't want to really frustrate people by trying to take a big bite on a really challenging project like Post Creek.
No, that makes sense. It's good strategy, I think. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, you bet.
Great, thanks, Hillary. And thanks, Joe. Any other questions for Joe? So I want to check in with DNRC and Ross Beatty to see if he had an update. Ross, anything from your end?
Nope, I don't have anything today.
Okay, thanks.
Second.
All right. So I'm going to just double check that I didn't miss anybody, because I know we have folks sitting in for others. Anybody else with an update here from the subcommittee that wanted to make sure that they provided that to the group today? Go ahead and raise your hand or jump in if you have something. So Dylan, with that, I think we'll move towards public comment before we adjourn for the day, if you wanted to facilitate that.
Yeah, sounds good, Randy. Similar to this morning, if anybody out there has a comment or a question, please raise your hand and I will unmute you. All right, see, David McEwen, please, I'm gonna unmute you. Please state your name, where you're from, and if you're affiliated with an organization.
Dave McEwen, Galata, Montana. You should all get a map out and find out where that's at. I'm a rancher, landowner, bear advocate, right, Hillary? I guess I'm a little confused why we don't have any land ownership type people on this committee. We are providing a great number of acres for habitat. There was a question that came up concerning the unwillingness to give NGOs grants out of a agency that has been long supported by land ownership type people, agricultural type people. And with this comment, I have a solution for Highway 93. NGOs just got done suing the sheep industry once again. And the net result was, because of a unfounded bear death by anyone or anything, it was enough to kick a producer off of Forest Service land down the Centennials into a non-use program, plus whatever they took out for revenue within that lawsuit. And the whole thing was to guarantee the safety and migration patterns of grizzly bear and then bighorn sheep too. But if you want to save the bear on Highway 93, you should do what they did to us, and that's just remove the damn highway. And I don't say that jokingly anymore. This thing has gotten way too far one way, and when we have to work, or people think we should work with NGOs, that would be the biggest reason for distrust. Every time we turn around, our industry is getting litigated. Bear relocation. There's an issue that's going to come up, and that's liability. And that was one of the issues that we talked whenever we passed that bill in the state legislature. You take a conflict bear, okay, he's had problems, he's gotten into trouble, and we're going to relocate him. And there isn't much of a rehab system out there to keep bears from killing pigs, calves, sheep, or whatever they're killing that got them in trouble the first time. And when we start moving those bears, the liability issue is going to come to roost. And right now, the bears belong to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as stated by their Washington people. So I guess I would have all of you folks consider those items, and that's why we are the way we are, I guess, and taking a harder line. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Any other comments in the public? Please raise your hand and I will unmute you. Randy, I'll just kind of pause here until you want to take it away. But anyone out there that would like a comment, please raise your hand and I'll unmute you.
Okay, thanks, Dylan. If we don't have anybody queued up, I'll just take a second to walk through our plan for tomorrow. Not that everybody doesn't have that in front of them, but again, just focusing on tomorrow's agenda a little bit, you'll see, we'll hear from Kathy Ake, an update on habitat monitoring, as well as what she intends to post to the websites on past monitoring reports. And then going to have a presentation from Chris Temple talking a lot about that habitat conservation work going on in Northwest Montana. Very much looking forward to that. And thanks to Jim Williams and Chris Temple and others who are pushing to get some attention to some of that work that's happened up there and intends to be continuing. And then we're going to aim to have a conversation around our work plan and priorities. And we'll hear from Dylan and Hillary and Lori Roberts. Also probably talk a little bit about the IGBC discussion around structure and how that relates to the NCDE. So it's an opportunity for us to kind of set the stage for the NCDE priorities, and really hope to have a good discussion around that and hope that everybody's able to attend. And then we'll see a transition for chair responsibilities. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I'll pause just long enough to see, Dylan, if we had anybody else intending to jump on.
Not seeing any hands raised, no.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for your flexibility today and adjusting schedules and lunch times and the rest. And without any other comments from anybody, we'll plan to see you in the morning. All right, thanks everybody.
Thanks, Randy.
Take care.